Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Victory Never Sleeps. Tonight we
Can I hear him?
are joined by Spekingr, Trent East, and Gothy, Bodi, Mayo. Bodi is doing a sound check, apparently. It's exciting to talk to everybody this fifth Wednesday of the month. We're figuring out kind of a new thing to do with that, as Brandy is unable to join us this time. So we are having two gentlemen that I think have a lot to offer on tonight's subject, which is, I guess, poetic reflections on perfection. The basic premise behind that is talking about, why we do the things we do, what the direction of those things are, and the value of making the best of the realities we face and transitioning from theory into practice, which I think is really important for a lot of people who find themselves listening to this program. So a couple of top of the show things for everybody this evening. First, Jeffrey donated $20 towards the Sigerheim Pavilion. Thank you for that, Jeffrey. We appreciate it. GW Farnsworth, as always, started our program off with a generous donation of $50 towards that Sigerheim Pavilion. Thank you. We appreciate you very much. And Stephen in Japan donated, also a very frequent contributor on the show, donated $5 towards the pavilion and $10 towards paying off Phrase Hoff. A couple of few things. Our progress on paying off Phrase Hoff. I try to give you guys kind of a weekly rundown on what that looks like. Folks have been very generous, as always, and I appreciate you guys. As of right now, we are 38.3% paid off, and that comes in at, if each member of the AFA donated $103 towards it today, it would be paid off. I know that we still have a long way to go on that, but it's really remarkable because we only dedicated that Hoff in December. So you guys are amazing with your donations, and I thank you for it. The other thing that we are, currently raising money on is the pavilion at Sigerheim. The idea is to have a pavilion up as soon as we can, hopefully by Ein Herjablot this year, which is going to be our feature event at Sigerheim for this year at least. And I would have to recalculate due to our recent donations, but looking at about $43 per member, I think would get this for us immediately. And again, we appreciate you guys making a lot of progress really quick on it. We've got a cool plan in place, and it should be the kind of impressive structure that we're going to need for many years to come there. It's going to be beautiful, and I look forward to gathering with all of you underneath it at some point. But yeah, thank you guys so much for your generosity. You guys are awesome. If Bodi is struggling with some technical difficulties here in the meantime, so Trent has been on program a number of times, but for people that might not be familiar or whatnot, Trent, could you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're located, and how long you've been involved with Asatru and with the Asatru Focus?
Yeah, sure. My name is Trent East. I'm honored to be a Spekingr of the Asatru Folk Assembly. I've been with the AFA for 11 years. As of the midsummer will be 11 years even. I've been Asatru for 11 years since this past Austra. a husband, father, Army veteran, and I'm in Georgia, USA.
Do people usually get that confused?
Uh, no, but we have an international audience. Just thought I'd say so, in case the bit of the American flag behind me wasn't a clue.
It's courteous of you thinking about our international listeners, gentleman and a scholar.
Yeah, I'm a
We are
giver.
also. What was that?
I said, yeah, I'm a giver. What can I say?
See, there you go. Generosity. Um, we are also joined by my good friend Gothy Bodi Mayo. Bodi is not able to join us in a visual sense this evening, so he will be here. His voice will be here for us, so we will communicate with said voice. Also, he's been on the program a number of times, but Bodi, could tell people a little bit about who you are, where you're from, or where you're located, and how long you've been involved with Asatru and with the Asatru Focus Center.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me again. So I too reside in the state of Georgia, USA, not the country. Um, I am a Georgian by birth and Alabamian by raising. Um, I have the privilege and honor to serve as a priest of this fine church. I have been a member. I believe, I'll share it with you, and I could not pin it down whether it was 2012 or 2013, one of those two. But either way, I've been a member since around that time. I've been an Asatru since Mother's Night of 2001. I am currently at work on the amber lamps, hence the visual or the audio only. Let's see, what else did you want to know?
How long that you've been Asatru and how long you've been involved with the Asatru Focus Center?
So, yep, I think I answered those. Been Asatru since 2001, and I've been involved with the AFA since 2012 or 2013. I think it was 2012.
So
2012.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to have questions and a variety of things to talk about tonight. But one thing that I kind of noticed is a series of interactions that seems to be on the uptick lately. So we have over the last few weeks, we have had a number of our posts on X get a lot of traction. And it's been a real blessing. It's been amazing to get our message and pictures of our folk worshiping our gods and gathering together in front of a much larger than normal audience, which is fantastic. One of the biggest challenges for the growth of Asatru and the growth specifically of the Asatru Folk Assembly is that in today's climate and with a number of struggles with things like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok for that matter, we're limited in the number of people that know we exist. Our potential membership is vast. The likely percentage of those that would be interested in joining the AFA, I think, is tremendous compared to our current member level. But the deal is a lot of people just don't know that we're out here and just don't know we exist. So the more we can increase that reach and get out of our normal circles, that is a great thing for all of us. But we get a lot of comments that indicate to me a lot of people struggle with a concept called, or that I like to refer to often as, allowing perfect to become the enemy of good. One of the things that is a forever, hurdle that we've seen, and I think that these two gentlemen can attest in their time in Asatru they've seen, there's a whole lot of time that people spend mulling over minutia in their head or theorizing about how things should be, could be, would be, possibly could be different if they were, you know, had unlimited resources or unlimited ability to do something. And all of that analysis paralysis leaves them exactly where they started before they had those thoughts or before they contemplated Asatru. We find a lot of people that are stuck there for, months, years, and sometimes in some people's cases, decades on, man, but the perfect thing, but the perfect man. What I'm waiting for is the perfect group that does things the way that's perfect with the perfect people in the perfect place. When I'm at the perfect time in my life, when, the perfect star alignment or whatever the case is, again, those guys don't end up getting up off the couch and doing anything. And I think that's something worth kind of pondering of what that looks like, why we do the things that we do, and why now is the quote unquote perfect time to start. So there's a lot to be spoken about tonight in regards to that. And first, Trent, is that something that you have noticed, or how has that shown itself to you in your experience with Asatru?
It happens in a few different ways, and it's been pretty consistent from even since I was just an atheist, kind of looking into Asatru. And it happens from so many different angles, from mostly from other people claiming to be Asatru or pagan or whatever else, even on in the right politically, you know. They'll say, well, you're not doing animal sacrifices. Well, you're not doing human sacrifices. Well, you didn't build that building, so it's not really a Hoff. And even those are more recent. I'm sure there's been complaints since 1968 when founder McNallen started this up, but it's a lot of that. And then people will say things like, this is why I can't get involved with the AFA. They're not doing exactly what I would do. And I know one of your favorite responses to that, sir, is, okay, well, where's your Hoff? What does your Hoff look like? Where's your national 3-day event with 150 people? And for some reason, they never have a response to any of those. So, yeah, it's a pretty persistent theme that we hear from these types. The wording of it never really changes. It's always one of a few different paths. It's usually some critique of the people or the building or the kindred flags or the lack of enough Viking looking stuff. But yeah, I've seen that a lot. I've heard it in person and mostly over Twitter, though, of course.
So, Bodi, you have been involved in Asatru for quite some time. Have you noticed this phenomenon? And if you have, how has it reared its ugly head in your experience?
Well, I hope that all of everybody listening who has access to the Runestone read my recent article that speaks to this specifically, because I wrote about my experiences in the first 25 years of Asatru so far that I've experienced. And in the beginning, in 2001, as I said in the Runestone article, it was very, very much, just, how to be polite here, a dude fest. So there was not a lot of, not a lot of women involvement, and there was always a lot of always backbiting, a lot of infighting, a lot of, I know how to do this better than you do. There was a lot of, judgments being thrown around. If someone was really trying their best to be pious and really trying to, worship the gods properly and honor their ancestors properly and make offerings and do bloat, then they were accused as being more Asatru than thou. And before the AFA became what it is now, and we were kind of all insular, um, there was a lot of what I like to call in that article cannibalization of leadership, meaning that back in the early 2000s, when I first came around, anytime a man or a woman decided to take the reins or the tiller, as it were, to use Viking, imagery, anytime somebody wanted to put their hand on the tiller of the ship and steer us all in a good direction, immediately the behind the scenes back talking started with, who does he or she think they are, and why do they think they can be in charge, and this and that. And so we experienced, or at least I experienced, just this rudderless existence where, yes, we had tiny kindreds that were, in isolated little pockets. Maybe those kindreds would get together if they were in their same kind of area. As I said, back in the early 2000s, people really wouldn't even travel out of the area of their state, let alone their state or their region or across the country. And so it existed for a long, long time. And, there was always, this, man, one day it'd be great for us to have a Hoff. Man, one day it'd be great to build a temple. Man, one day it'd be great to do this. And something else that you say, I'll share, Gothi, is that, one day needs to be day one. It doesn't need to, if we had all sat around and said, man, one day, then we wouldn't be where we are now. And I'm always struck by, like Spekingr East said, our detractors come at us and say, well, you're not doing this and you're not doing that. And our response is some variation of, well, we are doing something, aren't we? We are doing something. We're moving the ball forward. We're advancing the cause of Asatru. And what are you doing? All you're doing is complaining that we're not doing exactly like you want us to do. So there's that.
Trent's right that I do always that's my default response, about the, hey, where's your Hoff? Hey, where's your, and I can recall one instance. There was a children's bloat at Thor's Hoff. And believe at the time we had two Hoffs in the world. And we had a Gothy, like a legitimate ordained Gothy, at one of the two Hoffs that exist. Both were ours. And a group of children worshiping our gods. But the onlookers, well, that's not how to do it. Well, look how that's decorated. That's completely uninspiring. Man, that's how Protestant of you. And my response, this is the first time I remember saying it, and it was worded like, okay, well, please show me a picture of how your children do bloat in your Hoff so that we can learn how to do it better. And yes, so first I want to point out, I was 100% prepared if they're like, fine then. And they showed me, the Von Trapp family all doing this perfectly synchronized bloat in a towering gold encrusted Hoff. I was absolutely ready to sit down with a pen and a paper and take notes. I thought the smart money was that was not going to be the case. But it was a fun, sarcastic flex, but it was also a genuine, but wait, there's kids in a Hoff with a Gothy doing bloat to Thor in Thor's Hoff. That's pretty cool. And the complainers, as opposed to what? And that was kind of, Bodi talked about it. But one of the struggles that we had for a long time, and we continue to have, is we are in a culture where insincerity and sarcasm and just critiquing and criticizing is the coin of the realm. It's very easy to allow yourself to sink into commenting and critiquing on what other people do as opposed to doing. And, some of this is a defense of like, hey, we're doing the best we can. But a lot of it is also a call to action. Like, hey, if you want to see things that are great, if you want great things to happen, get up off your couch and make great things happen. And if you want to effectively help things progress in a way that, to your mind or to your liking, that progression ought to go, the best method for that is get on the team, get involved. We would love to have your help. I think another point that needs to be made, and I speak for myself, but I also speak for the entire AFA with this, we are fully committed to doing things the right and best possible way. It's not to say that everything we do is the right or best possible way, but it's our best attempt at it. We are sincerely committed to, trending ever closer to perfection, realizing that perfection is not attainable. It's not that we shouldn't strive for it, we should, but we're doing it wrong if at any step we don't see how we could do it better. One of the reasons that I chose Victory Never Sleeps as the name of this broadcast is that it's a constant process of pushing forward, and our desire to do glorious things for our gods, our folk, and ourselves should have no end. We should always want to achieve more, to do better, and to increase. That's fundamental to our very nature as Aryan men and women. And it's, it is the attitude and the determination that we owe to our gods. We have some good questions stacking up. We also have some stuff I'd like to get thoughts on and talk about a little bit. But before I do that, Gilbert, thank you so much. You're awesome. Gilbert, a super frequent donator on here, donated $150 towards the pavilion. We appreciate you. That's amazing. Thank you for that. And so I took some notes on some things I'd like to talk about. One thing that, and this touches on other things, so I'm sure we'll get back to it, but one thing that I find is a detriment of our folk is the purity spiral. And I think that, we all may have a different understanding of exactly what that means. But in our demand that everything and everybody be our imagined version of perfect, there's a tendency amongst our people, I think most prominently amongst our men, and amongst our men most often amongst young men with a lot of time on their hands. When everything is in the world of theory, then you can come up with the most perfect scenario that doesn't have to conform to the reality of life as it's lived by real persons. So there's a constant infighting of let's find, all the ways that everybody isn't perfect and dismiss them. And what you find is when you do that, it accelerates. It doesn't just, okay, this one guy's not perfect enough. Well, then the next guy that's slightly less perfect. And then the next guy and the next guy and the next guy, until it's just you in mom's basement wondering why nothing gets done. And I've seen that an awful lot. And whoever wants to jump in, but gentlemen, what would you say to folks that are afflicted with this mentality?
Well, one of the biggest insults or comments, whatever we get on Twitter lately is, these Orthodox Christians or whatever, crusaders will comment on the weight or lack of physical excellence in some cases of some of our members. And I find that critique specifically coming from these types to be interesting because anybody who's done anything to worry and try and better themselves physically knows that it takes work. It takes time, whether it's diet, exercise, should be both, by the way, but both of those things take time, effort, and it's a journey, as cheesy as that sounds. And so these same people will say, no, I'm not joining any cause until I know it's perfect. Well, just like that fitness journey, you want these overweight people to lose weight. It's a journey. You want the AFA to have purpose-built Hoffs or more people or what have you. It takes work. There's not going to be a ready-made organization for you. Hopefully, I guess as soon as possible, the AFA is that organization, and our kids or grandkids have that available to them. But we don't have that yet. We're as close as you're going to get, I'll tell you that. But it's not going to be, hot and ready like the hot pocket that Twitter person's mom is bringing them in a few minutes. It takes work.
Side note: hot pockets are delicious. The ham and cheddar's good. The barbecue ones are awesome. No, they are. Trust me. But that's a very common thing, and it's something that you touched on a couple of points there. And I wanted to also, I'm not immune to that either. I remember when I first joined the AFA, and when I first came home to Asatru, I had a whole lot of I knew exactly the perfect way to do everything, and how come all of these, other dullards aren't doing things perfect, because I am a genius and I know everything, and I'm, 20. And I think that a lot of people, when they're, 18, 19, 20, up into their mid 20s, I think all of us know absolutely everything about absolutely everything. We have the perfect formula in our head. If only we were calling the shots, and everything would be perfect. And I appreciate that my elders at the time were gracious with me, and I got to learn why things are the way they are, why things work the way they do, and temper the purity spiral with the reality of the world that we're in. And as I did, I was able to stop sitting around frustrated about what we didn't have, and be really excited about the amazing things that I was able to be a part of by joining and being part of the Asatru Folk Assembly. And so I think that we all, we've all been there. Not something that, anybody on this call doesn't struggle with. But it's a really important shift in perspective that kind of needs to happen. So you brought it up, and I want you to answer this. Trent, why are there so many fats in the AFA?
Some of our detractors call it a cop-out answer, but oh well. Just the soul sickness, as it's been called, it's sort of the sign of the times. But as some people in the comments on YouTube are pointing out, I could ask the same of Christians. I could ask the same of white Buddhists, white Hindus. I could ask the same of any ethnic group, and it'd be pretty funny if I did. I won't, but it's not just an us problem. It's not just an AFA problem. In fact, I would argue that if you're going to look at any Asatru group versus the AFA, I think probably we look the best. And that's not to say there isn't work to do. I wake up on days and I feel scrawnier than I'd like to, or I try and make sure I get my macros the way they're supposed to be for the day, and I feel fatter than I want to, whatever. And there's people who are in much better shape than me in the AFA, or a good bit worse shape than me in the AFA. But it it's just where we're at right now as a people and as a human population in the West, frankly. And everybody's aware. If you're watching this, you're probably aware of all the stuff that's in food and how caloric surplus makes you gain weight, caloric deficit makes you lose weight, and eating too much is going to make you fat. I mean, it's pretty simple stuff. And the answer, like I said before, to that is simple, but it takes work. It's just what's happening, you know.
But it do. Yeah, that's the thing. The simple answer, and I think that oftentimes it's not a question. It's just a snarky, effete criticism of stuff. The reason that there's so many fats in the AFA is that we're based in the United States. It's where the majority of our membership is. And in the United States in 2026, we have a significant obesity problem. The mission of the Asatru Folk Assembly, a mission assigned to us by the ICER, is to bring our folk home, to have, as our founder called it, an ingathering of the folk. And that means taking our folk where we find them and inviting them to come home. But we don't stop there. While we do have people at all different levels of fitness and different levels of fatness, we actively try to help and encourage our members to get better at that. Bodi, could you talk a little bit about, I don't know, the culture of trying to help our people fix it within the AFA?
Sure. One of the things that kind of strikes me about this situation and this topic is that our detractors seem to think that fat people don't have any worth. They shouldn't have an opinion, that if you're not swollen fit, nobody should listen to you, that you're basically a non-person. And that is not the message that we're trying to send to our people. You know, just because you're not necessarily the fittest person on earth, or because you have a few extra pounds, or if you just let yourself go, that doesn't mean that you have lost all value as a person. And I think that were we to take that approach, then our number would be far fewer than it is today. It's just a mental block that people have. And yes, you should always strive to be as fit as you can, both spiritually and physically. But as Spekingr Trent said, it is a process. It is a journey. You can't judge someone. And, you know, and one of the funniest things that I think we've all seen is, you know, super fit people in the gym make fun of a fat person that's in the gym. Look at him over there, Tubby, look at him. And you're like, but he's in the gym. He's not on the couch eating Lay's potato chips. He's in the gym. He's actively trying to fix the problem. You should be over there giving him tips on form. You should be explaining to him that he's doing that exercise maybe not the best way. I saw a wonderful video of a super fit dude going over to a guy who was like 500-600 pounds, was doing lat pull downs. And this guy walked over and stopped the guy and he said, hey man, can I help you out for a second? Here's how you properly do a lat pull down. Bring it to your chin, lean back a little bit. He didn't mock the guy. He went over and he helped him. And I think that if we do more of that, then there would be less fats in the AFA and everywhere.
Yeah, something I'd like to say. So within the AFA, one of the I was this year at midsummer, I will have been Alsheri Gothy of the Asatru Folk Assembly for 10 years. When I was installed as Alsheri Gothy, I addressed the folk. And one of the things that I said was that I was committed from that day forward to help our people to achieve excellence mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I always keep that in mind. That's been something very important. Literally since that day, the AFA has tried to encourage fitness amongst our members, to help those who wanted to improve and to get better, be it to gain muscle or to lose fat, to help those people. We've created, in every iteration of any of our groups and interactions, we've had groups. Right now, we have a physical excellence group, and I think that's why we called it physical excellence. Was those are the words that I used at that address, and it's one of our most active groups, if not the most active group. We have members on there every single day, talking about ways to tweak their diet to get better results, ideas for exercise. We have a physical summer challenge going on right now to kind of encourage everybody to have accountability with each other and work towards a higher level of fitness. We post workout routines in there. We talk about nutrition, and it's active. It's active every day. We don't chase around our members and demand that they lose weight. That's not a practical reality in the world we live in that's going to be effective. But if we're looking at it right, we should want all of our people to achieve physical excellence and to be the best version of themselves they can be. If we allow people who are not perfect into the Asatru Folk Assembly, and I'm not, to avoid the hyperbole, if we allow people at a substandard level of fitness into the AFA, we are optimally poised to help them to get in a better level of fitness for themselves, for their families, for their appearance, for their health, for their well-being as souls. If we don't, and we say, hey, no, move it down the road, chunks, we got no room for you here, we have abdicated our ability to help them make improvements. We have forfeited the opportunity to be a positive force in their life to help them succeed. That is antithetical to what we're about as noble people. We want to lift our brothers and sisters up, even if they're heavy. These are, in no particular order, but just kind of questions that come up, and trying to get perspective and answers on those questions, because they're things people wonder, and they're not formatted. We live in this soundbite culture, and it's not really formatted for a sentence or a witty quip back at a detractor, but it is worth explaining to people, and it's something that does kind of come up from time to time. So one of the things, gentlemen, so Trent, why do we dress like Christians?
Good question, but we don't. We dress like respectable white people in the Anglosphere specifically, to be fair, which Christians in the Anglosphere that aren't the annoying hippie Christians also do. Something I kind of discussed with somebody about this a few weeks back on Twitter was, they had that question, why you dress like Christians, you should be dressing like Vikings or whatever. So, no, we shouldn't. Please don't do that. But the point kind of came to me, when the unfortunate conversion to Judaism to electric boogaloo was happening across Scandinavia and the rest of Europe. Did the Vikings start wearing a suit and tie in 1032 or whatever because Jesus, or did they keep dressing like Vikings and they swapped out their Mjolnir for a cross or some other Abrahamic accoutrement? It's the second one. No, that they didn't start wearing a suit and tie because it's a Christian thing. Suit and tie is an Aryan thing. I think it's specifically probably a British thing. Forgive me for my lack of exact knowledge on where suit and tie comes from, but it's just a very white man thing to do. a well-meaning atheist could wear a suit and tie. He's still going to be an atheist. A Jewish person can wear a suit and tie. He's still going to be Jewish. You see a white man in a suit and tie, and there is a, not respect per se, but there's an aura, to use one of the kids' terms, about him that says, okay, this guy is serious. Whatever this guy is doing, he means it. And that's a big part of why we do it, I suppose. It's not the primary reason, maybe the secondary reason. The primary reason why we dress the way we do is because we are going before our gods, our ancestors, and the rest of our folk. And these are gods. You know, it sort of relates back to that old stupid Facebook Asatru meme of I don't kneel before my gods. As the old Gothy has said, is if Lord Thor came down from on high in his chariot, I promise you would kneel. So when we get together to worship the gods, again, literal gods, yeah, we want to look our best. You want to put on a nice suit, a nice tie. Ladies put on a nice, respectable dress, what have you. You would put on the best of what you have. And I'm sure that in the Viking Age or the Asatru, Saxon Age of England, whatever, our ancestors would have put on their best tunic or their best whatever women wore kind of dress back then. You know, it relates really well to the gifting cycle too. When we do that, the heart to hand to horn, we're giving them the best of ourselves because they're gods and they're our gods, and that's what they deserve.
Bodi, do you have anything you'd like to add on why we dress the way we do? Or as the question is formed against us, why we dress like Christians?
Yeah. So one of the things that I responded, the way that I responded to that in the past, when they're like, why do you dress like Christians? Well, we don't. Like Trent said, we don't. We dress like respectable white folks. And the way I framed it to the person who asked it to me a while back was that all of the mother countries in Europe have a national dress, and they are all quite beautiful, especially the women folks' dresses and the different, flower crowns and whatnot and things that they wear. You have I think it's pronounced bunad, that the Scandinavians wear, the Norwegians and the Swedes wear the ladies' national dress. And so the question is left to us as Americans and Englishmen in the West. What do we have as a national dress? Well, for us men, it's the suit. That is our national dress. That is the hallmark of the Western man. That is what you are expected to wear anytime you are doing anything official. Anytime, I believe we've talked about this in the past, anytime you go to court, anytime you go to a wedding, anytime you go to a funeral, anytime you go to any public ritual or any public official business, for men, that is the dress we're expected to wear. For women, you're expected to wear a modest dress. You're not you're not supposed to dress lewd and lasciviously. And that same applies to us men. So that is the reason why. And I wanted to go back to something a little bit earlier about, our detractors coming at us for all various different things. I was reminded of an instance where a person who had left the AFA contacted me personally and accused me and all the rest of leadership directly of being your yes men. That we are just, all we're doing is just being, all you are is Matt Flavel's yes man. And you just do whatever he says. And I said, you know what? We are under his direction. We do follow his, his instructions on how to run the church and how to do this. I was like, however, if he were leading us off a cliff, I was like, I can assure you that I would, be, advising him to please not steer us off a cliff. That's not a thing. So everyone always thinks that they can do it better than us, but they're not doing anything. So we'll dress how we want to dress, and that's that.
A couple of things I wanted to add on dress, and the one thing I wanted to add about people's physical condition. So, and Bodi made this point, but it's something I often say. if you're dressing for something that you care about, that's important, and that you want to look like you take seriously doing, you dress like Christians. I'm doing air quotes, but we got the narrow thing so you can't see them. Anyways, the same complaint. For yes, we are dressing like serious white men and women who are doing something that we take seriously. We are approaching our gods in worship. We should dress that way. It's funny because, yes, that's what Christians do. Because the Bible says to wear a suit and tie? Well, no, of course not. Because they are there to worship a God that they genuinely love and believe in. So they are showing up with the respect that's due to that occasion. That's admirable. That's what white people do in Western cultures in 2026 when you're at something that's important. When you're at a funeral, when you're at a wedding, when you're at a graduation, when you're showing up to court, when you're showing up for a job interview. It's a mark of taking something seriously. Trent mentioned briefly, it comes from the like, oh, we don't kneel before our gods chest thump that so many have done in modern Asatru. But if you go to court and they say, all rise, the Honorable so-and-so presiding, you stand up. So you're willing to do an act of acknowledging your superiors in a court of law. You would salute in the military. You would do all these things. You'd bow if you were in the presence of actual royalty, but you wouldn't for a god of your folk. I think it's a mark of whether you take it seriously or not. And we want to show our seriousness and our piety in the way that we dress. Another thing is, AFA is, we have never demanded that people dress nice. We have encouraged our people to dress nicely and dress appropriately for bloat and attending the Hoff. But we've never demanded that. We've never thrown anybody out. We have asked people to change their clothing, I think, twice, because there was obscenities on the clothing, or there was some kind of crass, lewd, naked chick on something, and then something else with the F word on it. And that's not appropriate at our Hoff when we're honoring our gods. That's not appropriate in general. But no, outside of that, we haven't ever made anybody dress differently, but we have tried to encourage it, because we want to encourage our people to take it seriously and to be their best. We always want to encourage our folk to be their best. While we're on the subject, some people who detract from that will mention, oh, but all of us don't have money for nice clothes. And I said this on a show with Alan. I don't know if it was last week, possibly, but the band t-shirt that people wear to the Hoff would cost more than going to Goodwill and getting a shirt and a tie. You can get a whole outfit with slacks, shirt, tie, and a nice pair of shoes for less than the jeans and the band t-shirt that so many are fond of wearing. But also on the physical fitness thing, something that I've absolutely learned in Asatru. We are all flawed to one degree or another. Ideally, we're working on those flaws to be our very best, but we all have imperfections. It is the imperfections. I don't know. Often there are some of us that wear our imperfections in a very visible and obvious way. There are other people that, look like the recruitment poster, that look immaculate. And they hide imperfections in places you can't see. But oftentimes they are just as flawed, if not more deeply flawed, and in a more insidious way because you can't see it. So we want all of our people at all their level of development to join and to get better. Sometimes it's obvious. sometimes it's more subtle. But yeah, another thing that has come up, and I'd like to ask you first on this, Trent. Bodi, why do we wear stoles like the Christians?
Because there is an adaptation to it in ancient Aryan practices, and we have been able to recover such things through archaeological and anthropological digging and research. You may know better than I that famous statuette that we found, not we, the AFA, but that archaeologists found, that clearly shows a bearded man wearing a stole, and it is mentioned in several instances throughout our history. I believe Spekingr Trent mentioned that the other day on X. So I have him tag in on that because he remembers probably I know the answer that you gave, Trent, was more specific than what I'm doing right now, but it is historically attested to. It's not just something that we picked out of a hat or we saw the Pope and his minions do it, and so we wanted to do it. So I can't remember exactly, but it's not something that we do just frivolously.
I think that was the Altera Gothy that posted the exact source for why we do it. I had argued with somebody because they mentioned that it was a Greco-Roman thing specifically, and I was like, "Oh, white people," and they didn't like my answer. But no, that was all I contributed to that conversation.
Yeah, the stole is from even the pre-Roman period amongst the italics, and it was something specifically attested to as something the priests of Jupiter would wear. There's a whole bit, and it was cool because on the same tablets that we're talking about the use of the stole in that ritual and as a symbol of that priesthood, it also talked about libations with mead, which was interesting. But yeah, it predates Christianity, but also in 2026, it is easily recognizable as something that a clergyman wears. And it's a very practical garment for people to understand that you are conducting religious ritual. It's come in really handy in prison ministry and in ministering to our folk who find themselves in long-term care facilities or in the hospital. It immediately marks our Gothar as clergymen, and with it, they're afforded the respect and privileges that come with that position. And it's something that's used in a lot of different contexts, and I've seen in other iterations outside of Christianity. But yeah, it does have its roots in European paganism that predates Christianity, certainly.
I'd like to point out something, if I may. When we were at Alstra at Thor's Hoff, one of our newest apprentices, Mr. Blake Deshane, give him a little shout out. There were a lot of young men there that were either new to the AFA or new to Asatru who were coming to a Hoff for the first time. And several times throughout the main event day on Saturday, Blake, brought young men to talk to me that had questions. And I was not wearing my stole at the time, obviously, because we weren't in ritual, but I was wearing my ring. And Blake pointed to my ring and told one of the young men that was, he had brought over to ask, have me answer a question for. He pointed to my ring and he said, if you have any questions for, that while you're here, just look for that ring. That ring means that they are a priest. That means they're a Goði and they can answer your questions. And that struck me very, it really moved me that here's this young guy who just joined our church and just became, decided to be an apprentice, and he already gets it. And he's already pointing this out, and he's already cementing this in this young man's head and all those young men there, that was a sign of our office.
Absolutely. And that's important. And I think that it's Worth noting, kind of a couple of things. I think that in people's mind, when they complain about the stoles, they have some other idea. But the other idea is like dress like a Viking, and that's kind of silly. I'd certainly be open to a variety of different ideas for any kind of a clerical vestment that sets clergy apart, but dressing like a Renaissance fair Viking doesn't do anything to signify that you're a religious officiant practicing a serious faith. Certainly not in any kind of superior way than us trying to wear stoles and wearing them respectfully while executing our office. So, Trent, why do we worship in Hoffs instead of out in the woods?
Because Hoffs are our space. They are a space that we specifically can consecrate and make sacred for us, to our folk, and to a purpose. I can answer that question better too, because if I kind of frame it in the way where I know our detractors in other Asatru organizations kind of throw that at us. We often get this thing from, and I think we get it from Universalists too, once they're done calling us racists or whatever. They always say, oh, real heathens worship in nature, et cetera, et cetera. And that's true, of course. There's nothing like doing a blow to the All-Father in a little grove in the middle of the night with a fire. There's nothing like it. But they think that's the case, partially just because of Facebook memes or whatever. And then the other big reason they think that is because they read Germania by Tacitus, which you should do. And this was, the Iron Age, early kind of Roman imperial age. And Tacitus says then, in that time, that the Germans worshipped only in groves and they had sacred groves. And I'm sure he was largely correct. I don't think he was totally correct because he had never visited Germany himself, but that's where they get that from, and that's fine. But our people, like any people and like anything in the natural world, we evolve, and our faith evolves. So, back then, did we worship only in groves? Probably not, but let's say that was the case, right? 600-ish years later, we have the temple at Gamla in Sweden. There was one in Yavering in England. I think that's the one in Northumbria. There's one in Rendlesham in East Anglia in England, I believe. Probably more than those, of course. There were temples all over Scandinavia, Germany, wherever else. So we know for a fact that our ancestors did have Hoffs, and that they really, really treasured those Hoffs, and they were sacred places. So, incidentally, us worshiping in Hoffs is kind of a point in our favor to those that say we're not perfectly reconstructing the Viking Age way of worship or whatever other nonsense. And partially the reason why we do it too is because, like with the suits and ties and also the gift cycle, these are gods. They deserve our best. They deserve whatever we can give to them. And if we can give them a, taking back Aryan-built buildings from the scourge of Christianity and repurposing them and rededicating them to something that is noble and beautiful and true, like the Aesir, I think that's a pretty decent step in the right direction towards, honoring them. So we worship in Hoffs because that's what the gods deserve.
Do you have anything to add on that, Bodi?
Yeah, my only answer to that is we evolved. Our ancestors did that back in the ancient forest of Germania because that's what they had, and that's what the gods revealed to them as proper at the time. We have evidence, as Spekingr said, of temples to our gods from a long time ago. He mentioned all the Hoffs that he knows in England. There was also one in Ireland that was referred to as the Temple to the Red Thor and was said to be clad entirely on the inside in red gold. So, if anything, we need to get more gold in our house if we want to be correct. These people seem to think that worshiping outside is the only way, and that kind of plays into another trope that we see all the time. An accusation is that, Asatru is supposed to be a nature religion. No, it's not. We revere nature. We honor the land of Atir, and we try to live as much as we can in harmony with nature, but we are not resigned to only worshiping outside. As Trent said, out back in the ritual space at Odin's Hoff, is that a beautiful place to have a bloat on a moonlit night with a giant fire? And the Alsharia Gothi doing, one of his world famous Odin bloats? Yes, it is. It's one of the most powerful things I've ever experienced. But I've also had extremely moving experiences in bloat inside of all of our Hoffs. So our detractors are stupid.
There you have it. So, a serious note on that. It's really important when examining history and our lore in particular, and the material culture of our ancestors, to take things into context. Tacitus was writing a political work, and one of the main aims was to contrast the idea of the noble savage with decadent Rome during his period. So it was not saying it was dishonest, but it was to his advantage of what he was trying to convey, to highlight a primitive element to the Germanics and their practice, as opposed to the decadence that was overwhelming in the upper echelon of Roman aristocracy at the time. You see all branches of Aryan people, when they have the ability to create temples and beautiful things to our gods. There's nothing biblical or Christ-oriented about the great cathedrals of Europe as far as their inspiration. It's what white people do when they want to devote themselves to worship and to grandeur, is to build beautiful things to honor their gods, to house them in beautiful places with soaring architecture reaching up to the sky. You certainly see that in the classical world, but you also see that in the period where Asatru have access to materials to build nice things. The juxtaposition between Hoffs and nature is kind of a false one. You don't have them often worshiping the gods just out in the woods. You have them in sacred groves that are meticulously tended and cared for, or in stone circles with stones that have traveled a great distance and have been shaped and put in a particular way in areas that they have altered. You have stallies and bloat houses. You have Hoffs and bloat structures in Anglo-Saxon England. You have them throughout Scandinavia. There's plenty of examples of our ancestors having temples to our gods. So it's absolutely an authentic practice, something our ancestors did. And moreover, it's something that people who take their faith seriously do. And furthermore, it's something that we are so blessed and fortunate to live in a time that we can do. Again, these same groups of people complained for, I don't know, roughly 45 years about, man, any day now we need a Hoff. One of these days we'll have a Hoff. I wish we could have a Hoff. As soon as there's Hoffs and we have them, the people who don't want to, well, we didn't need Hoffs anyway. We didn't need a Hoff. I can go out in my backyard. It's very tempting when you don't have something or when you're not able to accomplish something to revel in your mediocrity and to act as if it's a virtue to not have nice things. That's, what the kids these days call a cope. So a final note on that, and then we'll get to some of your questions. This follows along, and Trent kind of alluded to it, or even answered the question a little bit. How come our Hoffs look like churches? Bodi.
Because they were churches. I mean, it's not rocket surgery. I mean, and one thing, and I know I was being a little flip there, but I was asked that recently from a member. They were like, "Hey, are we ever going to actually build a Hoff?" I'm like, "Yes, cheers, Hoff. We're going to be building that soon. That's in the works as soon as we can. We're working on that." I was like, but I think the better question would be, why are all these former Christian churches available for purchase? Maybe their dominance in Western society is waning, and we are nothing else if not a pragmatic people. I know the Goði and I often speak about our shared Scottish heritage that makes us quote unquote cheap, or makes us quote unquote thrifty. So I think it was altogether fitting and proper that we should look around and say, well, we have need of a building that can hold a congregation. What types of buildings do we know scattered amongst the landscape that could serve that purpose? And lo and behold, what do you know? There are properties of Christian congregations who have fallen apart and fallen by the wayside, and their buildings were there to be bought by anyone. So why can't we? Why couldn't we? I mean, it was not being used, so why not?
Do you have thoughts on that, Trent?
I mean, yeah, but it's kind of just the same answer I've been giving. Why do our Hoffs look like churches? One, because they are, and well, as you mentioned, sir, churches, nice buildings to worship in. That's not a Christian thing; it's a white people thing. Uh, White people built the cool Gothic cathedrals. White people built the various Protestant churches that we have rededicated into something better by making them Hoffs. And of course, white people will build all of our purpose-built Hoffs. But yeah, a lot of this stuff, like, you're doing this like Christians. No, other white Christians are doing white people thing and just devoting it to the wrong God. And we're just devoting it to the correct gods. That's the difference.
A couple of notes. Churches are built optimally for a group of people getting together, sharing meals, and worshiping in a nice building with space for gathering and space for eating and preparing food, often with a nice surrounding acreage in places that are intentionally convenient for people to get to. And they're also zoned correctly, which makes these things very attractive and exactly what we need for the things that we're trying to do. So yeah, we're not trying to trick anybody or to fool anybody, but I think it's also really important to realize, and again, the casual passerby that doesn't have any actual interest, it's just curiosity that maybe they see in a feed on X because they're 3 or 4 people removed from somebody who had an interest in it. They don't know about Asatru. They don't care to. They're just like, Asatru, they worship Thor. They should be looking like Vikings. Whatever. It's too long of a conversation for that level of, not having the intellectual curiosity. But it's important for anyone who does care. Asatru is not locked in the Viking Age. It's a real faith, a sincere faith that has been with us since our origin and will be with us for the rest of our existence. It's as relevant today as it was in the Viking Age, as it was in the Neolithic period, and as it will be in the future. It's also not based around the negation or counterpointing of Christianity. We don't define appropriate practice by how exotic and different from Christianity it looks. White people practicing religion looks really similar in a lot of different ways for very similar reasons. White people practicing religion in a particular country at a particular time is going to look largely similar because it comes from the same people, the same culture, in the same, the same material culture, devoting themselves and their worship to gods that they have a reverence for, care about, and want to show their best selves to. So we shouldn't be surprised that there's similarities. And a lot of these things go without saying, but they kind of stack lately with some of the things. And I think they're things people have in their mind. And it goes to the overall thing I want to kind of harken back to today, is not letting perfect be the enemy of good. One day we'd like to have the most magnificent Hoff that's, as big as, the great cathedrals of Europe and, made out of stone and marble inlaid and gold encrusted. And yeah, we would love to have that. But if we all sit around and wait until that happens, a couple of things. First, maybe waiting a really long time. And secondly, the first question's kind of a non-starter, because if we don't start where we're at and make progress towards it, there's no possibility of getting there. So we do the best we can with what we have at our disposal, with our ability, with our understanding, and with our resources. We make the very best of it that we know how to, and we build upon it. And as we gain in resources, in knowledge, and in ability, we do more, we reach higher, we get closer to the perfection that we all, would like to offer before our gods. But the first step is seeing where you are currently and moving forward. And that may look different for all of us. But, going back to what Bodi said towards the beginning of the program, there was this thing for a long time, and I think that the conversations changed a little bit because a lot of the groups that were vying for prominence at the time have long since ceased to exist. But everyone wants to start fresh. And when every year you cannibalize what exists and you start fresh, you can't make any progress. If every year is year one and you don't get to year 2 or year 3 or year 32, like we're in right now in the Asatru Folk Assembly. So progress is happening. We would all like to be perfect. It's important to kind of look and see who's making an effort to move towards that perfection. And can you be part of helping people get there, or are you holding people back? Another thing that is relevant to mention in this conversation is something part of the soul sickness that afflicts our people is the crab in the bucket phenomenon, where as soon as anybody tries to better themselves or do something or have something nice, all of the sad people have a pathological need to try to pull them back down. How dare you have nice things? How dare you accomplish where we can't? How dare you have things we want? When you see inequality, you can't force the lower to be as good as the upper, but you can always tear down the upper until they're as low as the lower. And that's the easiest path and the path that people sometimes intentionally, oftentimes subconsciously do. Let's pull everyone else down to our level so that we don't have to deal with the discomfort of others being more successful than us. We would all be so much better off if instead of that, we were inspired to do more and be more. If we saw the success of others as an example of what we could accomplish, or as a challenge to do more and to surpass and to overcome. I hope that our folk can heal and internalize that as we move forward to an increasing degree. We'll see. We have some questions stacked up, and I'd like to get to some of those. What is the most common religion / denomination / belief held by members before they come home to Asatru? Trent, in your experience, what would you say that is?
Just Protestant Christianity broadly. There's a few denominations in specific that we get a lot of members from. Mormonism, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, whatever, is an especially big one. Myself, folk builder Tyler Heinlein, a bunch of other members that aren't coming to mind right now, but a lot of us come from that faith. Here in the Bible Belt specifically, a lot of former Southern Baptists. We have not a large number, but a sort of, when put in perspective, kind of large number of former Jehovah's Witnesses, of course. I would say, and then if I had to say the biggest denomination would be just kind of the broad, non-denominational, just sort of nominally Christian, Christmas and Easter only types would be the biggest that our members come from, largely just because of the state that Christianity is in the West.
What would you say the most common belief, denomination, religious system that people in the AFA had or had prior to their AFA membership, Bodi?
Like Trent said, the most I've ever seen, the most numerous would be Protestant Christianity. I myself was inside of Central Baptist Church, 1407 Broad Street, Finney City, Alabama, every time the doors were open, but no, I'm not bitter. I've seen some Mormons. I've seen Jehovah's Witnesses. We also have a fair number of folks who weren't raised in any religion before coming to Asatru. So super jealous of that. That must be nice, to not have all that, baggage to, drop at the door and things to unwrap your head around. So yeah, pretty much it's, especially here in the South, Catholics are are thin on the ground here, and I think for good reason. I don't think our ancestors really wanted to deal with a fellow in a pointy hat anymore. They'd rather have, one of their own preaching to them. So, yep, just Protestant Christianity is the most numerous.
I'm a swerve on that. I think that was the case for a long time. I think that cynical atheism is the one that I've seen the most in recent times. And I mean, it sounds in a way like kind of sidestepping the question, but I don't think it is, because I think it is, in this day and age, adhered to with the fervor of a religion, of a religious conviction. And that's been challenging because, as I've said on the program a number of times, I think it's easier for religious people to practice a different religion than for inherently irreligious people to learn how to be religious. But I think that's certainly something we see with our brothers and sisters in Europe, as they've been largely secular societies for a longer period of time. But more to the meat of the question, I would say generic Protestantism, as far as church attendance stuff, I've seen a surprising amount of Pentecostals that have joined the AFA, or at least been very interested in joining the AFA in recent years, which is interesting to me. I don't claim that's the majority, but it's a surprising number in kind of an obscure sect of Christianity. Bodi, what can you tell us about numerology, and does it play a part in our cosmology?
Can you be more specific?
No, I'm not asking. I am repeating a question that was submitted to us.
Numerology, as in the 19th, 20th century study of numbers and their effect on anything in society? I don't think so. We have a sacred number, which is 9. Other than that, I don't necessarily know how numerology would be a part of Asatru at all, outside of our sacred number being 9. So yeah, no, I don't really have anything on that one.
Trent, what are your thoughts?
I would say, what can I tell you about numerology? Not much. Does it play a part in our cosmology? I'm going to say no, other than there being 9 realms and 9 being a recurring motif. And I know that's not like an interesting answer or a cool answer. And I'm not going to be so full of myself as to say that numerology definitely has no part in our cosmology. Only the gods would know if that's the case. But in my short time in Asatru, relatively speaking, no, I've not seen any real connection to numerology outside of the number 9 being sacred to us, because it recurs in the various stories in the lore.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I don't want to be flippant about something that I'm just not very well versed in. In my understanding, numerology means different things to different people. There are recurring numbers in the lore, tend to most often be multiples of 3. As Spekingr Svan frequently reminds us, there are tripartites in many, many elements of our lore and on many different layers. 9 certainly is a number that, recurs too many times to just be coincidental. 12 is also very well attested and a frequently utilized number. There's numeric significances that way, that I think our mind draws us to seeing, them being recurring and them being kind of stand out. And I think there is symbolism and significance that is inherent in those and can be built upon those. But I don't see numerology as being overwhelmingly meaningful. I know that people will position different letters in the alphabet with different numerical values, and they'll try to add up the letters in a name and it will be meaningful to them in some way. I truly don't understand that enough to, debunk it or say, have an opinion on it one way or another, although it's not something that I've noticed to be meaningful. I know that Dr. Stephen Flowers in some of his runic writings has talked about, assigning numerical correspondences to the runes in the different rune rows, and for there to be some numerology built into that. That's never been a part of my practice. and I can't really say that I know Asatru, who it is a part of their practice. Trent. From Celine, I was looking up the medicinal purposes of the herbs used at Nornanot and wondered, do they have any magical significance / correlation to the ritual blow performed, especially in relation to the feminine, as I noticed that most of them do help with feminine reproductive health problems?
I'm not going to be able to answer that as well as Gothy Mayo, most likely, but I will say Spekingr Spawn got that list of herbs from the 9 herbs charm, which is something that's kind of in our B list of lore stuff. Gothy Mayo, do you know more about the 9 herbs charm than I do?
Unfortunately, no. I do remember that the 9 herbs charm speaks to the herbs, and the 9 herb charm is as follows. Let me pull it up so I can read it. Spekingr Spawn simply says, or the subtitle to the charm simply says it's an herb bundle to protect the folk. And the herb charm goes as follows: be they wound to witch's bane, in the fire a hag's fate wanes. An Englishman's foot is bushel bound, there a swine's snout will be found. Let the tongue of a toad cover thee, and sprinkle thyself with the dew of the sea. A tuft of hair from the old man's head, twined round tight the old wood bed. Valerian turns away the evilest eye, and so must the nymph's spur die. Lastly, Thor's helper must be a strong rod, and on the gray road your prayers well shod. So in that, the witch's bane is rue, plantain is the Englishman's foot, dandelion leaf is the swine's snout, sage leaf is the toad's tongue, rosemary sprig is the dew of the sea, mugwort is the old man's head, valerian root is simply valerian, and spearmint is the nymph's spur, and the rowan twig is Thor's helper. There it is. So as far as those things, I have a little bit of knowledge of some of those things being used for feminine issues. I'm not exactly sure of all of them. You know, I don't traffic in herbs. I traffic in modern Western medicine. So I'm not really exactly sure how those apply, but that is the charm, and that is what we did burn at Nornanot. So the purpose was not specifically to address any female health issues. The purpose of the herbs charm was to recreate and push forward an old tradition in a new way, and that at Nornanot in olden times, the women folk would gather these herbs and they would burn them, and they would waft the smoke in 2 fires and pass the cattle and the men between them, because in our agrarian past, this time of year is when the Alsheria Goði and Spekingr East and I, were we rich enough to have many head of cattle, we would drive them up into the mountains or up into the summer pastures at this time. And so in order to ensure our safety and the health and wealth of the animals, those blessings would be bestowed upon us by our women folk. So this is a recreation of that, so that we can cleanse ourselves of all the negativity that we're bringing forward into the year and get rid of it. So that was the exact purpose of Nornanot. I'm assuming that any of these herbs taken in a tincture or in a tea, I know for a fact that some of them do alleviate symptoms, but that's about the extent of my knowledge as far as herbs and women's health issues.
Fair enough. So that particular blend of herbs and spices is about cleansing and protection from witchcraft. And one of the ideas, Nornanat means witch's night, and it is a dual purpose bloat that welcomes in and empowers the female magic inherent by our women, by our goddesses, by the spirits on our team, and simultaneously seeks to protect us and shield us from the magic that's leveled against us by opposing forces, by the forces of chaos, by our foes, by malignant spirits. So the frequent practitioners of said thing, the witches, are generally and inherently a female domain. And I think that's why some of the herbs have relevance to female issues and female health. It's very much a female holiday, both in offense and defense in that sense. Sorry, guys, I'm looking back over the questions. Bodi, I had read somewhere, also from Celine, I had read somewhere about the philia part of the soul helping or hindering depending on one's actions. It specifically mentioned evil people having chronic illness or injuries in cases of harming women and children. Is there any truth to this, or was it misleading? I wish I knew where I had read it from, or I would reference it more specifically.
Well, I would say that if you are a worker of ill, that your philia is not going to assist you in such things, and is probably not going to look favorably upon you doing so. It is there for your guidance and assistance. It is there for benevolent inspiration and to keep you as best it can on the path that is true. So I do not think that it would look kindly on you doing things like harming women and children. Other than that, I don't really know of any, adaptations in the lore about that. But I can definitely tell you that it's not, to be a worker of ill is not going to put you on a good footing with your philia in you.
Trent, do you have something to add to that?
My answer is pretty similar. I would say it's correct to say that your philia would assist you in times of need, or in times of when you're aligning yourself with right action in a way that's very important, and you kind of need the assistance. Similar to how when you align yourself perfectly with right action, and your woad self, as it's called, is sort of there to make sure you hit the target, so to speak. I would say that's a fair thing to say, is that your philia would assist you in that. That's kind of its purpose. I don't know that your philia would sort of injure you if you were planning on harming women and children. I guess I would hope it would. I don't know of any attestation that happens, but I would certainly say that yes, your philia does help you when needed, if your deeds are good, or your attempted deeds are good in that case.
So a lot of this has to do with a recurring theme on the program of wholeness and of right action at the right times. The more you align yourself with the forces of order, the more you align yourself with the Aesir and with the flow of earth, the more in sync the elements of your soul are together when they harmonize and when they're all working together for common purpose. There are instances, and I wish I could remember where in the lore this was mentioned as well, but there's instances where one's Fylgja would abandon them because they had become worthless, they had become malignant. And so I absolutely believe that there's a point where your Fylgja can, cool, I'm gonna sit this one out because you are not aligned, because you're at odds with your Fylgja. One of the key aspects of early psychology and of legitimate psychology is the ill health that comes from you being conflicted and from you having internal conflicts with yourself. So when pieces of your soul are at odds with one another and they're not working in harmony, it opens the door to ill health and malignancy spiritually, physically, and otherwise, and reflects on your luck. When things are harmonized and work together in sync, the opposite happens. And I think that in a case where somebody is deranged or evil-minded, evil-hearted, and does wrong action, the Fylgja can flee from them or can work against them, and you have that conflict between pieces of your soul. Trent, what would you say to this one? A couple of pieces here. What I struggle with is a person asked once, basically, I'm not white, but can believe in Asatru. And you suggested it's only right. Actually, I'm going to take this one first and I'll throw it to you. It's a direct thing about something I said. And you suggest it's only right they worship their own gods, but doesn't, I'm sorry, I can't read, I promise you. But does that mean just any and all gods are real? Because if that's the case, well, that makes this even harder to believe. Just any and all gods are real on a whim? Every other racial group's cultural deities exist? Isn't that a little too convenient? It sort of feels like, shoo, go away. This is our little club. Go get your own. But I thought these gods aren't philosophical, but highly serious and real, meaning everyone's other gods can't be. Why not just say only the European deities are true and everyone else is false? And it's simply the harsh reality, but true. I would gladly say that if I thought that that was true. But I don't necessarily think that that's true. So there's nuance here, and I'm really not evading taking a stance on it. This is very intentional. It is not the position of the AFA to adjudicate the relationship between other races of people and their deities. I'm not saying that their gods are all real. I'm not saying they are all not real. I'm not saying which ones are and which ones aren't. They're all not my gods. And our focus is on our folk and our gods, and respecting the dignity of other groups of people to forge their own relationship with their deities is, a courtesy and a nice thing on our part, and is respectful of them being able to work out their own destiny and their own existence. The races of mankind are very different and are not the same. They all have concepts of religion and deity. Ours is ours. and ours is true, and ours is the gods of our folk. That's absolutely true and is not a philosophical concept, but a truth that we know. Other races of people have to work that out for themselves and explore the truths of their various forces they interact with beyond this world. And I do think that that's the appropriate position. It's not our job to tell non-whites what gods they're supposed to worship or not. It's kind of presumptuous for us to do that. And I don't think that inherently the existence of our gods doesn't inherently negate the existence of other gods, of other kinds of living thing. And I don't think that's inherently true. I think that we are very used to Abrahamic deities that claim to be the God of all of the things. That's inherent in monotheism. But in the history of existence on Earth, that has been the exception, not the rule. It didn't occur to non-Abrahamists that other people's gods don't exist or don't count. That's not the case. You would see time and again when different groups of people encounter one another, their belief that the other group of people's gods exists. That was common amongst, all the time in the classical world. It was common when Europeans interacted with any of the different variety of Native Americans. The understanding that other groups of people have their own gods and that those gods have a power for those people was a very common thing in the world when, and I believe still is in the world, when you're not dealing with Abrahamic faiths. Polytheism lends itself to that understanding of the world in a very particular way, whereas monotheism rejects that possibility inherently. But even in that case, you don't see that to be true. You read in the Bible about, how thou shalt have no other gods before me. It acknowledges that other gods exist, but you're not to worship them. In Europe, during the colonization of Christianity taking over Europe, the conversion, it wasn't so much that our gods didn't exist, it's that they were demons and they were bad. But I think that the most common stance, until it had become culturally ingrained for generations, was that other gods exist, but the right God, the only God you're supposed to worship, is the Jewish Jehovah God. So no, I don't think that's inherent or a necessary thing, and I don't think it's too convenient. It is, in a way, shoo, this is our own little club, go find your own. But that's because that's the facts on the ground, not because it is of convenience. We believe that people are inherently genetically built to have their own spirituality in their own way and are inherently different, and they relate to the divine in very different ways. Hopefully that interfaces between them and their gods in the way it's supposed to for them. Gentlemen, do you guys have anything to add on that?
Not a whole lot, but it's an interesting conversation, and I appreciate the question because that's always a really fun topic to get into. I think I hope that every race has their own gods and that their own gods are real, but just because it's nice to be nice and want nice things for people or whatever. But on another level, and this sounds flippant, but I don't really care in a sense, and that's nothing against those other groups. No more so than usual, anyhow. I'm white. My wife is white. My son is white. My best friends are white. I know our gods are real. I've felt the presence of our gods. And all the white friends I mentioned are all in the AFA, so they all have too. I've never sought out the presence of other gods other than the Jewish God when I was a Christian, of course. I never felt anything there. It, I don't know. It's just one of those things. When people come to Asatru, they kind of ask this, and they'll also ask, oh well, the story says that Odin and Villianve created the first man and woman. Was that the first people ever? Was it the first white people ever? And I don't want to minimize it and say it doesn't matter. Of course, it matters, but again, in a way, it doesn't. We know that whoever Osk and Embla were, they were like us. In the Rigstula, Jarl, Karl, and Thrall, they were us, right? And just as a nice person, I want that same situation for all the different races. I want them to have their own stories and their own gods, and I want them to have a great relationship with their gods or whatever. Let me see how the question worded this real quick. So it sort of feels like shoo, go away. This is our little club. Get your own. Yes. This is ours. Go away. Have a great time going away, but go away. Yeah. In all seriousness, though, yeah, no, the old Sarah Gothy answered it pretty well. This is ours, and I hope you have yours, but this is mine,
Excellent. All right. One of the more recent complaints by our detractors is our membership cost. Why does the AFA have membership costs? How does this make us different from other quote unquote Norse pagan groups that are free to join? Bodi.
Money is how we do nice things. Money is how we have Hoffs. Money is how we have a priesthood. Not that we get paid, but money is how that we have a priesthood. Money is how that we have all the things that we do. And those free quote unquote Norse pagan groups, again, back to the earlier part of the broadcast, where are their Hoffs? Where are their members? They're not doing anything. They are, as you said earlier, when you talk about people being stuck, those groups who, cry and moan at us about having a membership fee, those are the same people who still meet up in state parks and still do camping moots because that's all they have. Now, camping moots and all that were great 25 years ago, but we've evolved. And things cost money. We can't just wish Hoffs and make them happen. We live in the real world in 2026. Things cost money. And we've said it a lot, when people ask me personally, hey, why do I need to pay a membership fee to be in the AFA? Well, do you want nice things? I mean, again, we can't whip these up out of hopes and dreams. That's not how the real world works, and we live in the real world. So that's why.
Trent, anything to add?
Yeah, that complaint has always bothered me, and I get why you would make that complaint if you don't take this seriously from the get-go or whatever, or if you're just genuinely asking. But typically it's asked from a place of someone who already hates us and they just want to level accusations at us or whatever. And maybe it's easier for me to answer this because I've kind of been in leadership long enough and high up enough in leadership that I see where the money goes. Spoiler, it just goes to the Hoffs and all of the things we say it goes to. But this matters. What we're doing matters. And I know, especially now, times are tough economically. I work a crappy blue collar manufacturing job. I don't make a lot of money. I get it. But my $22 a week, $88 a month, and no, that wasn't on purpose, just a happy coincidence, that I give to the AFA it goes to meaningful things. It goes to help all 5 of our Hoffs pay their bills. If my donations go basically to the general fund, that's pretty much what they do. But still, it goes to whatever little Hoff repairs we need, etc. Folk services, if a member is in need, it goes to helping them out. It goes to making all of this run. It's such a cliche, and I know everybody that's ever heard it was instantly tired of hearing it the first time they heard it, but money is what makes the world go round right now. And does that make us seem corporate or Catholic or whatever to the people that want to worship in their backyards? Probably, but the little bit of money coming out of my paychecks also helps make things nicer for AFA members or AFA families that have fallen on hard times or whatever. And think of all the stupid crap that our money goes to otherwise through taxes, right? Some of my money goes to the AFA, some of it goes to Israeli Tomahawk missiles to blow up Iranian schoolgirls. I'm not crazy about that, but I'm glad that I can control where some of my money goes and that it goes to the AFA. That went a little far afield of what the question was asking, but it is what it is.
Yeah. So, I mean, Bodi, I'll add to it, but just kind of restate. It's how we have nice things. More than that, it's how any religion ever in the history of the world has nice things. And furthermore, most often that's done in the form of a percentage-based giving. I was trying to look around. One of my first things as I was here at Gothy was trying to figure out, how does this work? How does fundraising for religious things work? How does it work, outside of Christianity? What are the other options on that? And this is how it works, is people give a percentage of their income to their religion. It's how, as far as I know, it's how most Hindus do things. It's how Sikhs do things. It's how Buddhists and Shintoists, it's how everyone does things. Or something very, very similar, because it's how people who take their religion seriously do things. Importantly, it's how our ancestors did things. The Hofftoller is our word for giving to the AFA based on a percentage-based giving model. That is extremely important. Our members that have chosen to give in that way have been a huge part of our ability to accomplish things. If you'd like to know more about that, please talk to your local folk builder. Anyone would be happy to help you if that's something you're interested in learning more about. But it's not a word that we made up. It's a word from our lore and from our history, that was the toll, the Hoff toll, that people paid to support the Gothar and the Hoffs in the prior period of Asatru. At Uppsala, there was the expectation that you had to pay to contribute to support the Hoff and the Gothic structure there. And so much so that if you didn't want to participate in bloats as a Christian, you had to pay to opt out during that period where there was some transition. I was learning about that a little bit more today as I was reading about Hoffs, just kind of incidentally. It was remarked at one point during the conversion period in Anglo-Saxon England, I think it was actually in contrast when there was the Danelaw and there was a Danish presence in England, that the Asatru would regularly stock and pay for their temples, and they were meticulous about making sure that they were bountifully giving to their religious structure, whereas they couldn't at the time get the Christians to regularly pay their tithe. And it was a point of contrast about, man, why are these Christians being so cheap with their giving to the church when, the Asatru were regularly supporting their Hoffs and their Gothar. So yeah, the contrast is we're able to accomplish things. We do things. we build legitimacy and we build nice things for the reputation of ourselves, of our folk, and of our gods here in Midgard. And we build institutions that will be here for our children and our children's children. I think the groups that complain about it, some of it is just to find something to complain about because they're overwhelmed with negativity. I think sometimes it's because they've just been so conditioned to see anything that, we have to be the anti-Christianity. So if Christians do something, we have to do the opposite. And I think there's other people that just genuinely don't take this seriously. There are people that are very content to like, well, me and 4 of my friends get in camp chairs in the backyard and we share a rotisserie chicken and we drink and we yell about the gods and it's fun and that's all there is. Those are often the same people that don't include their families. And those are the kind of people that, as soon as 1 or 2 of them move or pass away, they stop being Asatru and it stops with them. We're building things for the future. We're trying to build an institution worthy of our gods and something to further our faith because this is so very important to us. And the things that are important to us, the expression, put your money where your mouth is. You show what's valuable to you by what you're willing to donate towards and make happen. And, there's an evergreen source of complaining by people on the outside that we have, we require a donation in the AFA, but no one has yet to have any idea how to do it any differently or any better. There's always, that's wrong, we shouldn't do that. But there's never a suggestion. The same people want us to have Hoffs. They want this to be a legitimate thing. They want this to be something for their children, or they say they want that. But money is something that our people are kind of rally around complaining about. And the difference between, us and groups that don't is that we accomplish things and they don't. We're relevant and they're not.
Something I'd like to add, if that's possible, is that something that just struck me is that a lot of our people, yes, they like to complain about things and they like to complain about money, especially, and wonder why we have to have a membership donation. Number one, I think it's so that we know that you at least, as you just said, put your money where your mouth is, and you're at least going to put some quote unquote skin in the game. But also I think that for a lot of our people of all ages that come to Asatru, they are under this impression because they have experienced in their lifetimes this monolithic thing of religion. They see a Christian church of all type of denominations on every street corner. They see these big Catholic churches. They see all of this, and it never strikes them that all of that took money. It never occurs to them that these things just don't, appear out of whole cloth. They took money. It took lots of coin, lots of treasure to make these things, to make these towering edifices that are Catholic churches, to make all these, little Protestant churches. It takes money, but somehow, they turn around to see us in 2026 and go, well, why do you have to charge a donation? Why do you have to charge a membership fee? Because if we want the same things that they have on the same scale, that's what it requires. So I just want to throw that in there.
Well, and some of it's just, I think, a lack of being honest with themselves. How much money do you spend every month on Netflix? How much money do you spend on takeout food? How much money do you spend on a Subway sandwich? How much money do you spend on cigarettes? How much money do you spend on, whatever the things are that you like? And this is not to disparage any of those products, but it's to say you spend money, all day, every day on things that you choose, that you think are priorities to you, be them things that you need or things that you enjoy and you want. it says something if you're not willing to put money towards something that you claim to believe in. That's something that I think people should give some thought to if that's, if that's their position on it. I think sometimes it's just people being grumpy and bitter.
To add a quick second, Hoftaler is not a word we invented. It was not a Christian word. It was a word used by our folk outside of Christianity. And all of the Hoffs or the Gothar or the spiritual leaders, the folk for thousands of years have paid them via, it may have been via corn and slabs of beef, but they all needed money to survive.
Next up, so let's start with you, Trent. Question: in terms of seeking perfection, how have you three grown spiritually since entering in leadership? Are there any lessons that you have learned lately?
I entered leadership in 2017, so it's lots of changes. But as far as lessons I've learned lately, I don't know if I would call it a lesson, but something I've been sort of trying to do is just build relationships with the ICR or the Alsener that we don't normally build relationships with through the regular holy tides. So, or specifically as well, I've been working on my relationship with Lord Njorther because I'm the Hoff Gothy of his temple, and he before this he was not one of the ICR that I specifically kind of sought a relationship with. I'm a guy, so Thor, Tyr, Odin, Freyr on occasion were the ones I sought after the most. So I've had to sort of go out of my way to build that relationship with Lord Njorther, as well as the other ICR, Uller, Bragi, the Maidens of Fensaler, etc. And it's been really cool to kind of give little solo or family bloat to those different ICR, Alsener, and kind of hopefully as many of you as possible listening know that kind of feeling when you perform bloat or are standing in bloat, and you know that you were heard, you were seen, whatever. It's really cool to reach out to a god or goddess you haven't before and perform a very sincere, pious, dedicated bloat, and you kind of, the wind blows a certain way or whatever, and you feel heard or seen, and you know that you made kind of that first contact with that god or goddess. I would encourage everyone listening to do that because, we don't have a holy tide centered around Bragi. We don't have a holy tide centered around Clean, etc. So not exactly a lesson, but just some advice, I suppose.
What about you, buddy?
Sorry about that, guys. I had to step away for a minute. What was the question?
The question is, how have you, I'll read it to you exactly. Question: in terms of seeking perfection, how have you three grown spiritually since entering in leadership? Are there any lessons that you have learned lately?
Okay, so the first part of the question, how have I grown since becoming part of leadership? I have grown in my understanding of how the church works. I have come to understand all the moving parts that I am privy to as far as things that are in my purview to do. I will say it, I would consider myself woefully ignorant in how the church ran until becoming a part of leadership. There's kind of that when you're an apprentice folk builder, and even when you're a folk builder, there's kind of a lack of understanding about exactly the inner workings or the inner baseball, as we sometimes say. Spiritually, I've grown by leaps and bounds. Everyone likes to think that I'm this great lore master. I don't see it. But what knowledge I do have has been hard won and hard fought for reading many a dusty tome and making sure that I could understand and glean the knowledge from it. Recently, I've gained a lot of confidence when I perform bloat. I was always kind of nervous in the service. Number one, because I did not want to disrespect any of our gods that I was giving bloat to. I did not want to do a bad job for the folk. I didn't want them to think, what's this idiot doing standing up here? He doesn't know what he's doing. But recently, through talking with the Alsheri Goði and talking with Spekingr East and asking them for pointers, asking them for tips and, things that they do to not only prepare, but to perform bloat well, I feel that I've gotten way better at it. And just overall, as the days and the months and the years roll by, my knowledge of our faith and of our gods and how I fit in all of this has just only deepened and gotten better. So that's my answer.
Yeah, it's an interesting question to answer, and I think it's important, and it's always good to reflect on those things. It's hard to try to calculate or encapsulate. Tons. I jumped right in when I joined the AFA, and I tried to get involved in leadership as soon as I could because I really wanted to be as involved. I was so zealous and on fire for this when I found it, and I wanted to be as involved as I could. So early on, I stepped up to be a folk builder for Alaska, and at the time, like Alaska and the Yukon territories, and I think they put Hawaii with me because there was no place else for it to be. But so I've been involved in AFA leadership in some capacity since 2009. I have had to interact with the other leaders. I've had to interact with all of our members at all of the different geography and stages of life and age and all different ways. And I got to I feel like I've grown by getting a better understanding of our folk as a whole, having my finger on the pulse of modern Asatru. I've got to forge a friendship with our founder, Steve McNallen, and learn from him and from Gothy McNallen, and learn their wealth of experience being involved in this for as long as they have. I got to get so much wisdom and insight from their experiences. And I also the more I got involved in leadership, the greater I got to learn the weight and the responsibility of that. Being a Gothy and now being the Alsheri Gothi, to have to navigate that and counsel people in a variety of situations. And I've grown in the paternalism that I have towards the AFA, towards our fellow leaders and the membership. But I've also grown tremendously in my relationship to the ICER, and the very personally, just in my personal relationship, but also very specifically in my position as Alsheri Gothi, I feel that I have interacted with them in a very special and very particular way that has helped me to better myself in a lot of different ways, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. I feel like I've been blessed with a much closer relationship with the ICER than I would have experienced otherwise. And I also am able to appreciate all of the victories of the folk, because I'm in a spot where kind of all roads, all paths of communication kind of come up to where I'm at. So I get to hear about the accomplishments and the promotions and the marriages and the babies and all the different things going on within the AFA that are really special. I get to have a very special perspective on that most people don't get to see. From my vantage point, I get a much wider scope of vision on seeing those kind of things. As far as stuff that I've learned lately, or that I've ways that I've grown, I wish I had a really cool answer just off the top of my head. I feel like I'm always learning something new or something different. One of the things that I always tell the Gothar is, we always have something unexpected, or, when you think you've seen it all, you always see some new thing that helps you see stuff a little bit differently. So I wish I had a really cool thing just throw out there really quick as far as recent lessons that I've learned. I'm sure there have been tons, but I don't have one readily at my grasp to give you. I wish I did. Before I get to the next question, though, I don't want to forget Ben in Arizona. Thank you so much. He donated $20 to this program and says, had a victorious beta day. Thanks, Spekingr East. So I am glad to hear about your victory and appreciate your donation, Ben. Thank you. Next up, it really is a rite of passage to go get fitted for your first suit and buy it custom size. Can the AFA men help the younger men be properly sized to appropriately shop for suits? Do either of you gentlemen have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I don't have the exact measurements that you're supposed to know to get fitted for a suit, but I know it's kind of like neck, thigh, chest, etc. You can look up the list, and you measure all that in inches, keep it on hand, update it every so often, depending on if you're going through a physical change or whatever. I guess to answer can the AFA men help younger men be properly sized, etc.? Yes, we can. Also, like the site I order my suits from is it's going to sound fishy, but it's this suit retailer in Hong Kong called BD TaylorMade. I promise that while they are no longer owned by the British Empire, the Cantonese and Chinese hands there yearn to serve the Anglo-Saxons still, and so they make a damn good suit. And when you're ordering the suit, it's like they have to do it custom made, and so you type in your measurements. And I've ordered 4 or 5 suits from them now, and I've never had a single issue with it. So yeah, I would say bare bones, what you need to do is look up what measurements are needed for fitting a suit, and then get one of those flimsy tape measures, more flexible ones that you can kind of wrap around your different parts of your body to get a good measurement. And that's pretty much all you need.
Yeah, I get suits off of suitoutlets.com. And for some advice on that. First, yes, absolutely, people can help instruct young men on how to do that. But you can go into any place that sells suits and they will usually just be happy to measure you for them. I think there's sometimes shoulders, neck, chest, waist, hips, thigh. But there's usually a guy there that does that all day, every day, that can get you those measurements accurately. The other thing that I would suggest too, especially like I would have to custom order suits that way, but I don't like the way those fit. They're like way too tight. It's popular now to have like skinny leg stuff. I don't like that. I have to alter anything if I buy it off the rack, but I think that a good way to go is Suit Outlets has got cheap suits, and I don't mean like poor quality or whatever. Maybe they are, I don't know. But low price, affordably priced suits, and then take those and get them custom altered. And that's what I've always done. That's worked out good for me because I'm just very irregular that way. I can't, if I get something that's going to fit my chest and shoulders, then it wears like I'm wearing a tent on my midsection. And one thing that I think larger sized men know, they don't make big and tall. That's a misnomer. They say there's big and tall. It's big or tall. So it's for like short, fat guys or tall, skinny guys. But it's really hard to get like big chest, big shoulders, but also long enough inseam. So there's options, but I think that getting something that's big enough to fit your maximum measurements and then get it custom tailored is the way that I've found success. Bodi, can you address the disparaging comments about having female priestesses and having a female ranked above men that have been on the recent trash posts?
Sure. We can start with the basics. Duality exists in nature. Men and women are complementary to each other. We want to accelerate that forward into cultural practices and historicity. Our people have always had priestesses. The Greeks had them, the Romans had them, the Germans had them, the Celts had them, the Angles had them. Everyone had them. It was only the monotheistic Abrahamic faith that said, nope, women are beneath us. They can't do the things that we can do, so they can just sit back and do as they're told. We didn't have that. We've never had that. We are committed to reflecting the best practices of our ancestors as it pertains to Asatru, and this is one of those. I can't imagine. I really can't imagine our church without Gothyas. I can't. They are extremely important to our church. They're extremely instrumental in a lot of every aspects of things that we do. One of the not to disparage any of the other women of our faith or in our church, but I often refer to Spekingr Brandy Facet as the hardest working woman in Asatru. She definitely does a lot of stuff. And there are other hardworking women in Asatru. All of our Gothyas are. They provide services and counseling that are nuanced that not necessarily all of us, Gothar or us Gothys can do. They add a feminine touch, to everything that goes on. And to be kind of silly for a moment, they zhuzh up the place. They make it nice. So that's why.
So this complaint, there is a phenomenon amongst our very often young men that are isolated, that lack a lot of real world experience. Kind of the same set I mentioned earlier that do a lot of the purity spiraling, to where they treat life or their idea of what life is like it's a video game where you've got to like pick and choose where to place stats and like how to do your character creation, and oh, you need something for the religion slot, so let's put something in there. Well, what's my preference on how I create a religion? It doesn't work that way. Our religion is based on our understanding of divine truth and the relationship of our folk, between our folk and our gods. If we were creating like a made up religion with just random stuff that we think would be cool, then sure, we might create it that way with no female priesthood. And we could have all of our priests be, 6 foot or greater, and they could all be, 5% body fat, and they would all be geniuses. And like you very quickly get outside of the realm of dealing with real people in the real world. Our ancestors never had that kind of distinction, and it wasn't equality, and it wasn't sameness. It was out of a unique understanding that the women had a very particular skill set in relating to the divine. And you see this in all aspects of Aryan spirituality. It's not unique to Asatru or to the Norse expression of it. You have priestesses in all of the Aryan faiths, because women are able to relate to the divine in a very particular way, in a way that's very beneficial to the community. We've always understood there is a divine element to femininity, just as there's a divine element to masculinity. And to cut part of that off, or to negate part of that, would be unbalanced, and you'd be missing out on a lot of things. There is an inherent anti-woman bias in Abrahamism that leads to like, oh, it's trad and it's based to not let women do stuff. We're not trying to be trad. We're not trying to be based. Yes, stuff that we do happens to be based or happens to be trad because the right thing to do. But that directionality is really important. We're not trying to create this whole cloth thing to impress our internet friends so that they can tell us how based we are. We're trying to do something that reflects the natural order and that is true to divine truth the way that we understand it. So Gothias have always been a part of our faith. They're an extremely important part of the modern expression of our faith. I know that feminism, so this is something else. Asatru isn't a reaction to something else. It's its own thing. We do a disservice by making it a reaction to things we don't like out in the world. So feminism and an imbalanced, in-your-face, like gross feminism has been repugnant in our modern world. And so we recoil at it, and it's very natural to feel a need to react against it. But that's because there's a gross imbalance created by the degenerate world around us. That's not the natural state of things. In the natural state, there's a harmony there. There is a coalescing of men and women around rules that are suited for them, that fit well in them. And that was always reflected in society and is reflected in our priesthood today. Something else that's really true, despite whatever people, wish were the case, we evaluate the individuals who step forward and want to take a position of leadership in the church and want to serve our gods as priests or priestesses. That's not who we wish were there or who we designed to be there. These are the individuals who step up, who have that faith, who feel that calling, and who want to contribute in that way. Very often, our Githyas step up in ways that, our Gothar don't. They step up in ways that other members of the AFA don't. And they fill slots that there's not men out there that are going to do. So not only do I think that they're very uniquely inclined to do certain things in ways that are better or certainly different than men can do, but they also are sometimes the ones willing to carry the load and do the work, whereas a lot of men let us down that way. But they're uniquely situated for a lot of things ritually. They're especially uniquely situated to serve as conduits for the divine in particular ways, and we've seen that with our ancestors. In a just practical way, they're very good at building the frith and weaving the frith within our community, within the congregation, and also counseling our members. And not just like you might think with counseling, men counsel men, women counsel women, but sometimes you need that cross-gender counseling. Sometimes there's men that need to hear certain things from a woman or from a female perspective, or are willing to share or to be vulnerable, talk about what they're going through with a woman in a way that they wouldn't be with a man. And that's facilitated very well by our Githyas. So we have them there because this is Asatru, and that's always been something that Asatru has, and they fill a unique and spiritually significant role in our faith. That's the way the gods have ordained that to be, literally and figuratively, and that's always been expressed with our faith. We don't have an anti-woman bias. We have a pro-nature, pro-natural order bias. It's very important that we don't define ourselves by the negation of things we don't like, but by positive values of things that we do like. We try very hard to do that in the Asatru Folk Assembly. Trent, besides Founder McNallen's book and the work by Edred and the Eddas, what other books / authors do you guys like or that have influenced you?
We recommend Germania by Tacitus, as I mentioned earlier. Culture of the Teutons by Wilhelm Grönbeck, specifically the Antelope Hill Publishing version, I believe it is. Beowulf translated by anyone other than Emily Wilson. Deep Ancestors by liberal guy whose name I can't remember. It's got a wheel and a donkey on the front of some copies, I guess. Lady with the Mead Cup. Road to Hell by what's her name? If you look that up, you'll find it.
H.R. Ellis Davidson.
Yes, her. I don't have specific authors where they've just written, banger after banger, but Julius Evola had some good stuff. Revolt Against the Modern World, Ride the Tiger, Mystery of the Grail. That's more esoteric, kind of big picture, I guess. But yeah, that's what I got.
What about you, Bodi?
So the lady that Trent mentioned, H.R. Ellis Davidson, Little Hilda Rodham Ellis Davidson. She was actually a reader, I think, or a lectern, whatever it's called, in the Church of England. But her academic discipline was in studying the ancient faiths and the pre-Christian times of Europe. So she's written many, 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 many fascinating books. I say a lot of minis, like there's dozens, but the ones I can think off the top of my head are, like Trent mentioned, I believe you mentioned The Road to Hell. So there's The Road to Hell. There's Gods and Goddesses of Northern Europe. just anything with her name on it, I would say read it. I do not believe I remember the author, but there's a very famous book that studies the comparison between the Celtic faith and the Germanic faith, which is called Myths and Symbols of Pagan Europe. That's a pretty good one. If you would like to read more about than you ever thought you would ever want to know about the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest with Prince Herman, there's a wonderful book called The Battle That Stopped Rome by the historian Peter S. Wells. That's a very good read. Let's see what else. Trent already mentioned Culture of the Teutons. I would also, of course, recommend the book that the questioner asked about or mentioned, Founder McNallen's book. I would also recommend reading his most recent book, The Spear. There's too many to list. Too many to list.
Sure, what they said. Culture of the Teutons by Wilhelm Grunbeck is really good. I got a lot out of that. Trent mentioned it earlier. I really enjoy reading Evola. I've read all of the Julius Evola material that's been translated into English. Depends what you like to read. I mean, the question wasn't just relegated to Asatru specific books. It's hard because I very seldom remember authors of history books. I really like historical biographies. And I would have to go over to my bookshelf and root around to find names of some of the authors of those that I've liked. Again, I very seldom have names of people that write nonfiction kind of books. It's hard to, my brain just doesn't do that. But there's a lot of stuff. And I know that in a fun way, and this is something that Steve and I kind of bonded over, but Robert E. Howard wrote a lot of really cool short stories. And like, it's not that they're necessarily deep, but the tone of them is inspiring and masculine and assertive in a proud and excited way. So those are always really cool. Historically, I really like David Irving's books. I think there's a lot of, again, really good authors. There's a bunch of authors. There's a particular author I can't think of right now writing about medieval kings of England that I really like. But yeah, so a lot of that type of reading, but these other gentlemen kind of got some of the major Asatru ones before I did. What are the Bodi? What are the similarities and differences between a Githya, a vulva, and witches?
Pretty simple to me. A Githya is a priestess. A vulva is a seeress. And a witch is someone who typically and historically is someone who hexes people. And that is why the German word, we have the German word Hexennacht for what the holiday or the holy day rather that we call Nornanacht. Three important distinctions. I think one, if there are any, to my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but to my mind, if any D&D fans in the house, a Githya would be lawful good. A vulva would be, I would say, chaotic good. And a witch would be, help me out here, I'll show you. What would be the one on the chart for evil bad?
You're nerding out all on your own here.
Yeah, I mean, there are three distinct pursuits, I would say. Githya is pursuing, right good action and performing ritual for her folk and leading her folk. A vulva is tapping into things that us men do not understand. The very most famous vulva of all would be the one in the Velusbau, which translates into English as the Song of the Cirrus. So she is the one who would be performing Scythe magic, and a witch would be one who would be putting hexes on folks and doing things that ought not to be done to goodly folk.
Trent, do you have something to add?
Bodi addressed the differences, and the question asked about similarities. I guess for similarities, I would say they're all women, first of all, but they're all women who kind of dabble in the esoteric to varying degrees, obviously. Not all Githyer are super duper, say they're magicians, but I think all of our Githyer have dabbled in it a bit. Whereas a vulva, Cirrus, that's kind of her specialty, and a witch. That term has so many negative connotations. I don't really know honestly where they would land and how much Sather they work with, but yeah, that's the similarity, I think, is they all do some form of Sather in some way.
So there's a lot of overlap in those things, and I think that's worth saying. Yeah, they're all, obviously, as Trent said, they're all women. I think that the witch thing takes different connotations. It certainly does etymologically over time as it comes to us and develops. Agithya is a priestess. I think that's the last two we can kind of talk about, but the difference between the first and the last two: Agithya is a priestess, a vulva, and a witch are magical practitioners. All of these things can have overlap, and I think that they typically do in one way or another. But because Bodi opened the door to being a nerd on it, I think that one of the ways that you can kind of think about it is, there's cleric spells and there's wizard spells, and those are different things that you do through different means. And I think that's, an element between the Githya and the vulva or the witch. But like I said, there's overlap. The vulva certainly is a Cirrus, but I think, very often, depending on what you're talking about in witchcraft, there's a variety of things. And I think it becomes a catch-all. Yes, they put hexes and curses on things, but things and people, but also they practice healing and various herbal medicinal charms. They enact all kinds of different types of magic, and I think they end up becoming an overarching kind of catch-all between Saith Kona and vulva. All kind of get lumped in a witch category by the time you use the term. It's not really the term our ancestors would have used congruent to Githya and vulva. It'd be closer to Githya, vulva, and Norn. And Norn, like the big Norns in the high mythology, are weavers of fate. So the idea with witchcraft heavily relies on the idea of binding and separating and weaving things together. And you see that kind of weaving of things in a lot of spellcraft and that kind of practice. So I think that there's overlap, and the witch becomes an overall term for women who do magical things. But I'd say those are similarities. If one is just a vulva by itself, you could look at that as an oracle or a seeress. Oftentimes, a Seith Kono would be both that and what you refer to as a witch. But this is us piecing together imprecise linguistics. I think there's a lot of overlap. The next question is, for you, Trent, does everyone in your kindred need to be Asatru to be your kindred? I know AFA kindreds need to be all AFA Asatru. For a non-AFA kindred, if I ordained a wedding or ceremony, am I a Githya? Not by the AFA standard, but in my family. They want me to get ordained and do a wedding.
Yeah, okay, let me answer that a piece at a time. So everyone in your kindred need to be Asatru to be your kindred. Kindred in the Asatru sense. So the word kindred means family. So if you mean that sense, no. If you mean kindred as anyone in Asatru would use the term, yes. AFA kindred needs to be all AFA members. That's correct. For a non-AFA kindred, if I ordained performed a wedding or ceremony, am I a Githya? This isn't the nicest or prettiest answer, but no. I am of the opinion that the only current Gothar are AFA Gothar. But even if that were not the case, I would say that the title of Gothy or Githya is sacred. It's a lifelong thing. It's something you need to study for, and you put the work in to be recognized by that title. So simply getting an ordination at the courthouse or whatever to do a wedding would not make you a priestess. No. I mean, that said, if your family wants you specifically to get some form of ordination, perform a wedding, absolutely do that. That's certainly a tremendous honor. No? Okay.
No. Ordination means something. Getting an ordination out of a mail-ordered thing is just offensive. There's a lot of ways that you can do things in your state as an officiant. Oh, I don't know your state, but in a lot of states, to officiate a wedding without being clergy, but an ordination specifically for any faith is a serious thing. Those of us that are Gothar or priests in any capacity have devoted our lives to the service of our gods in a very particular way. And it's disrespectful to the concept for people to go get a quick mail order ordination so they can fill out paperwork. I get it being special to your family, and there's a lot of states that you don't have to have any ordination in order to do it, but you do have to register as an officiant. There's ways they can get married civilly at a courthouse. You could perform some sort of ceremony, and then they can get it stamped off by the judge. There's a lot of workarounds, but I think it's really important not to disrespect the position of a priest in any faith by that. Ordination is a serious thing. I get that it's easy to get in today's world, but it devalues the position of all the rest of us when people get it without the sincere commitment of, being that. I'd say if you wanted to become a Githya, then certainly, go through the steps within the AFA, and we would be happy to help you get to that if that's a commitment that you want to make that's lifelong. But yeah, and I get it. We live in a time where families are very disconnected and often don't have a religious tradition or a religious body that they're a part of, and they want to have a particular kind of ceremony for their wedding. But it's something that we take really seriously. There's a point of having a Githia or a Gothy perform a wedding before the Aesir. It is a significant and a holy rite performed by people who the gods have ordained and recognized as clergy. Going through that system in that way recognizes the authority of the Aesir and the position of Gothy and Githia as being something important. So I really urge people to do that. If your family members are Asatru, they should join the AFA if they haven't. And if they did, we'd be happy to, arrange for someone to be involved in officiating that wedding. But no, I would not consider you a Githia if you got a quick ordinations for a family Githia. And I think it is, and none of this is aimed at you for asking the question. Thank you for asking it. And it's not to be a jerk, but it's because it's our job to be honest. Truth is one of our virtues. And I think that kind of a quick ordination to do a one-time ceremony is disrespectful to the office and Gothy or Githia. All right. Emily has 2 questions. And Bodi, maybe you can help with this. Hello, I have 2 questions. If there is time for both of them, there is absolutely time for both of them. I'm interested in joining the AFA, but my husband, who is Catholic, is the sole breadwinner and will not allow me to pay the dues to join because he is morally opposed to it. What do I do about that? And is there any hope for me joining? And I think the second one might as well included in the first one here. Can you give advice on how to navigate a situation where my husband has forbidden me from practicing Asatru in our home? Thank you very much for your time. Bodi, what advice would you give Emily on these things? And before you do that, I just want to say, no, if you do not have money at your disposal and you would like to be part of the Asatru Folk Assembly, and your unique situation is that you can't at this time pay dues because of your marital situation, while you get that figured out, don't let that hold you back from joining. If you sincerely want to worship the Aesir and we'll make that work, please don't let that hold you back from joining. Outside of that, Bodi, would you like to advise her?
The first thing and foremost is an uncomfortable truth that I have observed over my lifetime, especially the past 25 years of being Asatru, which is that mixed faith marriages rarely ever work. They rarely ever work out. I've seen but a few instances where it has. Your predicament, Emily, is quite the pickle, I would say. I noticed you mentioned in the question that your husband is the sole breadwinner and therefore controls the finances and will not allow it because he is morally opposed to it. As the Alsheri Gothi said, from our standpoint, do not let that be the money issue be a bar to you. I'm sure that we can work something out on our end with that. The best advice I could give you is that speak honestly and earnestly with him. Explain to him that this is your sincerely held belief, that this is not some idle fad that you're pursuing. And if this is truly in your heart, that you like all of us, you must follow it. If this is something that you seriously wish to pursue, then I would say, let nothing stop you. I do not condone or advise you to, blow up your marriage or cause any friction in the household unduly. However, if this is what you sincerely want to do, then I really don't. I really don't have any other advice. If that's something that you really want to do, then I say that you have the right to pursue it. But again, that is quite the situation. I'm not quite sure exactly what words I could say to, make this situation make it make sense. Um, I'll show you, Gothi. I'm just gonna have to defer to your wisdom on this one.
Cool, but let's first defer to Trent's wisdom. What do you say, Trent?
I mean, as Bodi said, that is, yeah, definitely a pickle. As far as navigating that situation where your husband's forbidden you from practicing in the home, it's, if he specifically said in the home, not to get all semantic, but like I mentioned earlier in the question about Hoffs, our ancestors did also practice their faith in nature because the world was made by Odin and his brothers for us. If you gotta find a way around the rule, I would recommend that. But also, as difficult of a conversation as it may be, you may just need to press the conversation with him and say, "Hey, we need to talk about this because it is a serious matter." And I can tell by your questions that you know that, and he's looking at it from a different angle, your husband, but it's a serious question for him too, and it's a conversation that needs to be had, and you guys need to work together on that and figure that out one way or another. That's pretty much all I have.
So again, it's important to be honest on here and to be as honest as we can be on it. So I don't know your situation, and I don't know if you have recently become Asatru or if you were Asatru before your marriage. I don't know if your husband was Catholic before your marriage or has recently become Catholic. It is the advice is that you need to be on the same page religiously and about your core values with the person that you're married to. Now that can go both ways. That can be you becoming a Catholic, or that can be he becoming Asatru. Obviously, I think that the perfect solution is him becoming Asatru. But if one of those two things doesn't happen, it's going to make your relationship very, very difficult, and there's going to be a lot of heartache involved. I also don't think it's something that magically necessarily gets resolved overnight. And I don't think it's the first step isn't, well, fine, then let's get a divorce. I think that there is a discussion process and a working things out process that should be pursued. And, again, him becoming Asatru is the best bet. But it's important to consider how important this is to you. And is your troth to your husband more important than your troth to the gods? Or is your troth to the gods more important than your troth to your husband? And I think honestly reflecting on that will inform how you deal with this situation. I think if you have the flexibility in your situation to be Asatru, to practice Asatru, and to reflect the good that, Asatru making you a better person, Asatru making you a better wife, Asatru making, if you can connect your faith with your value as a person, perhaps he would look at it differently. Perhaps it would cause him to reconsider his own faith or his own position on you practicing yours. But it's a very, very difficult circumstance, and there's nothing I can say that will make it not one. But that is between you and your husband as far as how that affects your marriage. You're absolutely welcome to join the AFA, and if you're unable to pay, we don't ever want that to be a blockage from you practicing our faith. So if you reach out, we can make that part work out. The rest is something we'd be happy to kind of help you work through, or advise you where we can on it. But ultimately, that's a decision that you're going to have to make and navigate based on the things that are truly important to you in your life. And as kind of a side note, just to follow up on the question about the ordination, the response in the chat, the ordained question, I understand I'm not a newbie though. I've been reading and practicing for a couple of decades. I feel like it's an honor that I would be asked by my true blood family to do the wedding. Certainly that is an honor, absolutely. I understand that you want to do that, and I understand that you've been Asatru for a long time. But this is part of the reason why it's so important. The idea that if you know enough stuff, you can just do it and be a Gothy for your family negates kind of the importance of what that means, or the value of what that means. Neither of the three of us are Gothar because we know stuff. We need to know things to be Gothar, to execute the duties of our office, absolutely. But it's not about reading enough books or knowing enough things. It's about devoting our lives to the service of the gods in a very particular way. It's about asking for them to bestow upon us the authorization and the blessings to represent them as Gothar and go through a fundamentally transformative process of being ordained and bound to the responsibilities of that position for our lives. And a lot of people, it diminishes that if you know enough stuff and you read the right books and you kind of know how ritual works, then that's good enough. That's not in religions that folks take very seriously. Nobody, in sincere Judaism, nobody thinks that you can just be a rabbi for a day because you've read your Torah and it's just for a day, so you're a rabbi. Or the Catholics wouldn't suggest you're a priest and you can perform the sacraments because you are very familiar with, or you've been Catholic for a long time. It would just seem preposterous. I assume that that's the case in many other faiths. It's a very serious thing. And the reason, there's kind of a modern skirting around that in American law, where you can just kind of get married willy-nilly a lot of places. Some places you don't need any authorization. Other places, it's all across the board. It once was really important that you're married by a legitimate clergyman. And now we kind of just do a nod to that by the mail-in ordination situation. But it does really diminish what it means to be a Gothy or Githia when, anybody who wants to becomes that for a day in title. It makes it a lot harder to establish the credibility of the office and the dignity that it deserves. And I also think it is a disrespect to the gods and to all those people who have come before us and devoted their lives to serving the gods in that way. Our next up, Bodi. Do any Gothy do bloat to goddesses known only from votive stones in the Germanic lands, like Alphinae or Sandrodiga? No disrespect. I know that I mispronounced both of those things horribly.
I can't speak to the rest of the Gothar, but not in a not in an official capacity in front of the folk, but in my personal practice, I have often um, given bloat to Nehelania. She was a Germanic goddess, and her shrine was specifically centered on an island in the middle of the Rhine. Um, this is kind of what some might consider a wild story. I read about her once, and then was gifted with a dream of her in her shrine. I've spoken with Spekingr Svan about her cult, and one of the things that was on a statue of her, which I saw in said dream, was that she was always depicted with dogs, with hunting hounds. And I saw that. I did not read this in any material. I saw it in my dream and then read it in the material. And so I have given blow to her often. Now, am I somehow connected to that island or attached to that part of Germany? Not to my knowledge. I had been heavily studying the gods and goddesses of our people and searching for lesser known ones. And before I came upon that material, as I said, I did have this dream one night about an island shrine with a goddess sitting on a throne with dogs at her feet as part of the statuary. And I also received images of folk coming by boat to make offerings. So was I tapping into something? I don't know. But yes, I personally have given bloat to a lesser known goddess. I also was set upon a path of creating a gift cycle with one of our lesser known goddesses, seen by Spekingr Herald, and I've often given bloat to her in the past year as part of my continuation of opening up a gift cycle to her, because she has not been given bloat or had a gift cycle, initiated with her in quite some time, as far as our reckoning is concerned. So yes, I at least have done that. I cannot again speak for the other Gothar.
Do you have anything to add on that, Trent?
I have also specifically given bloat to Nehelenia because the part of Europe she is from is where some of the Anglo-Saxons would have come from. And so when I was kind of in this phase of Asatru where I was really wanting to use only the Anglo-Saxon or West Germanic names for the gods and goddesses, I included, Nehelenia, Hretha, Saxnod, a bunch of others in this one kind of bloat I did. So I have done that. I want to say Gothy Jason Plord has also done bloat to Nehelenia in his personal practice. It's not him, it's one of the other Gothar. I don't remember which one though.
All right. Has the AFA offered an interpretation of the story of Asker and Embla somewhere? I've read the argument that it entirely dissolves any notion of Northern people's unique relation to the gods, and that Asatru is in fact explicitly a universal religion. And I saw some of the rest of the commentary in the comments. I mean, sure, you can read in the Asatru Trulagmal about the AFA's position on that story, not as like a breakdown of the story, but on some of its fundamentals and how that's developed our faith. It in no way does any of the things that is claimed there. It doesn't explicitly state that Asatru is a universal religion. It doesn't entirely dissolve anything. It says that the progenitors of our race, of our people, are Ask and Imbla, and it talks about how they were bestowed with the elements of the soul that made them us by the gods, by Odin, Vili, and Ve. There's no part there that talks about universality or about any of that. It does none of those things, and I'm kind of confused why anyone would think otherwise, because it simply doesn't. Our lore is for us, about us, and our unique relationship to the gods, and there's not any claim ever that it isn't, or that we're somehow the same as far-flung different types of things that our people encountered. And so, Bodi, do you have anything to add on that?
As far as our particular take on Ask and Imbla?
As far as the why, our particular take and why other people might be confused thinking it means some kind of universality.
I think they're trying to compare Ask and Imbla to Adam and Eve, and there the distinction in my mind lies. That is a common fallacy, that just because we have something that sounds similar, that it is similar. For my money and to my mind, it is not. People often make another comparison and say that Lord Odin hanging on Yggdrasil and winning the knowledge of the runes is similar to Christ on the cross. Two could not be further apart. A distinction that I learned early on, and this question did come up when I was a young Asatru and I was very new to our faith, about Ask and Imbla, and in reference to the comparison to Adam and Eve, is that in the Christian mythology, the Christian God created Adam and Eve out of mud, out of dirt. Dirt, while it does contain microscopic organisms and does contain quote unquote life, the contrast to Ask and Imbla is that Odin, Vili, and Ve found Ask and Imbla as an uprooted ash and an uprooted elm on the beach, on that primordial beach. So one could intuit from that their names, meaning ash and elm, meant that they were once alive. And one could also argue, and I do, that just because a tree is uprooted does not mean that it is dead. So in our conception of our cosmology, Ask and Imbla were already living material. They were already living essences that were laying there, unshaped and uprooted. And Odin, Vili, and Ve bestowed the gifts upon them that created them into the first man and woman of our people, not of any other people, of our people. And also the distinction, of course, as I said, is that they created life out of life that already existed. Well, it's incorrect to say they created life out of life that already existed. They took material of life that already existed and they transformed it into something useful. An uprooted tree is no longer useful. It's there, it's laying on the forest floor, it's laying on the beach, it's dying. But if you come along, as Odin, Vili, and they did, and you have the powers that they had and have, then you were able to transform it into something greater than what it was going to be. So to me, that is the distinction.
What about you, Trent?
I think perspective is important. Something to keep in mind is that the iteration of our ancestors, I guess, that would have recorded this or began kind of passing the story around orally, when they say humanity, they mean white people. They might have meant just northern, like pale white people too. Something to think about is probably when this started getting passed around in the version that we know of, the furthest, like most exotic contact that we'll say the Vikings had was, or the ancestors of the Vikings really would have been the Romans, and they were white. You know, the Italic people are closely related to the Celtic people, who are closely related to the Germanic people, et cetera, et cetera. So their version of humanity was white people. So yeah, no, and they didn't feel the need to add some kind of qualifier about how like black and brown people were also, you know, descended from Ask and Embla or whatever, because when they said humanity, they meant themselves. And it kind of ties into this thing. Spekingr Swan touches on it on many of his episodes because it comes up. A lot of the meanings of different Germanic tribal names would mean something like the people, the folk, right? Like Deutschland, the German name for Germany, it means the land of the people, essentially. So that is why it's specifically worded as them being the first of mankind. They they meant white mankind, essentially. They just didn't know that that's what they meant, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, no, they would not have viewed Asatru as a universal religion unless, of course, the universe was small enough that it was only white people, as they may have thought at the time.
Yeah, that's and I understand the confusion on that, but again, it was not. It's very recently that there's some kind of universal understanding of like the human race. Um, the other types of creatures we inhabit this earth with, our ancestors didn't consider that under the term mankind, and most cultures didn't. As Trent pointing out, it's a common linguistic thing that, you know, when you talk about the people, it's us, and them are something else. And that's not meant as a derogatory necessarily towards the other, but it's from an internal perspective. Like, this is mankind, and then we've encountered this other species of thing that we're dealing with. And that was really, really common. And you see it, you know, up until the Enlightenment period. You see, you know, literally the author of, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, you know, that all men are created equal. They didn't at all think that blacks or Native Americans or Chinamen were created equal to white men. That wasn't, no one thought that. No one who signed that document thought that. No one who authored that document thought that. It's also self-evident in the owning of slaves, the way that the entire society was structured. They clearly didn't think that equality was a thing at all. When they're talking about all men, they mean all European men, all white men had that equality, and it was enshrined in that document in that way. And I don't say that to make a political point, I say it to make a linguistic point. They were very well educated. It just, that didn't occur. Like, what do you mean? That's obviously not what we're talking about. And I think that extended to our ancestors, who never in their life would have encountered someone who was not from a branch of the Aryan race, except for maybe somebody who was on the expedition and encountered Skraelings in North America, or maybe somebody who traveled far enough south that they might have seen an Arab. But yeah, I get the question of where it comes from, but it didn't say like all mankind. It didn't need to be inclusive. It said mankind, mankindi, I think, which meant the race of men, as opposed to the race of dwarves or the race of elves. But yeah, I see where the question comes from. Sorry, there's some different stuff going on in our where I get my questions. Got to sort it out. All right. Don't we have a right to curse our enemies like Schwab with the Thurs rune? This is a question. Trent, what do you say to that question?
A right to curse our enemies. I don't know if that's the word I would use per se, but I will say that the Halvamal, I forget which stanza it is. I can't recall the stanza number, but it's the one that says, repay gifts with gifts, repay treachery with treachery. If someone is truly an enemy, and you know how to use the runes to that effect, I can't tell you it's totally unreasonable or wrong to do it, depending on what you're doing and how you're responding, But I mean, morally speaking, the Havamal tells us how to act in broad situations. That's about all I can think of on that one.
Bodi, do you have any perspective on that?
I would advise caution in such things. Oftentimes, if you are driven to thoughts of correcting any ills, done against you in such a fashion, maybe it's time to stop and reassess what your priorities are, what the after effects could be, what as the phrase goes, the knock-on effects could be. I'm reminded of the phrase of when you point a finger at someone, remember there are 3 fingers pointing back at you. So our ancestors did not take things like this not seriously. They did not take them lightly. They took them very seriously, in fact. So do we have the right to curse our enemies? I would say in times and in instances of extreme evil and extreme duress, maybe one could find themselves in that situation. But again, I would counsel someone to try and resolve that conflict in any other way that you can, but that. If that is truly your last resort and you've exhausted all options, still, I cannot sign off on that. I would say that you need to, again, reassess the situation, because to do such a thing is serious. You are calling upon things that you might not really understand, and you might not get the intended effect. In fact, there is references in the sagas, in Egil Skallagrimsson's saga, and Egil was the Asatru Renaissance man par excellence. I mean, he could do it all. He could speak a verse. He could hew down foemen. But there was an instance where he came upon a girl who was lying sick in her bed, and none of her kinfolk could figure out why. And Egil, being the man that he was, walked into her room and immediately knew something was not right in a very non-physical sense. And so he lifted up her mattress and he found I believe it was a whalebone or a jawbone that had been carved incorrectly with runes to enchant the young maiden to fall in love with said irresponsible young lad. And Egil very famously snatched up the bone and scraped off the runes and wrote down or carved down onto the bone healing runes, and then very famously spake that one who did not know how to carve the runes properly should not do so. So there's an example of not someone cursing someone as an enemy, but someone trying to enthrall another by means of the runes, and it ended badly. He didn't want that girl to get sick and almost die. He wanted her to fall in love with him, but he didn't know how to do that, at least not via the runes. And so his intended effect backfired on him and harmed that girl. So in this instance of can I curse an enemy with the runes, um, again, probably not a good idea.
So it's a strange thing. No, I don't think you have a right to use magic to do things. And when we say that now, I'm not saying that you are forbidden from using magic to do things. But to say you have a right to it is like you're entitled to it in some way, and you're not. Very specifically, I think using magic, especially in a curse way, is outside of the things you have a right to. It's going outside of your box and venturing into kind of a restricted territory that there's consequence to. It doesn't mean that it's forbidden to you, but it's not in the toolbox of things that you are entitled to use or that are naturally available to you. It is you going for something outside of that. And it is, clear, we talked about earlier, part of Nornanot is, magically empowering our, witches on our side to go do cool witch stuff. And I don't even mean that frivolously, because I think there's fun, there's healing things that are very beneficial. There's stuff to be done. And there's time where people who know what they're doing and are experienced and have built gravitas in that arena to do curse work, to raise a nithing pole, to employ spiritual warfare in that way. But it is a path that is fraught with dangers and unforeseen consequences, and be careful when you stare too long into the abyss, because the abyss can stare back. When you delve into those kind of things, you expose yourself to a game that many of us, most of us, if not all of us, are not super well equipped to venture into. So I think that there's a lot of caution to be said, to be very, very careful and very thoughtful in how you approach any of that. Okay, so this is a good question, and I assume it was answered in the chat, but it's good for other people that might wonder it too. I'm skipping one, but I already kind of started, so I'll go back to it. Anyways, if I reach out via email, can I schedule a time to meet a leader or guide or some sort at a Hoff and spend time asking questions, being shown around and such as a non-member? Absolutely. Reach out to literally anybody and they can get that scheduled and get you to the right person on that. If anybody out there is curious about that and you have questions and you want to talk to a Gothy maybe in person and see what we're all about, check out the Hoff, get an in-person familiarity before joining. By all means, you can certainly do that. We can get that arranged for you. Just reach out and we will get a Gothy in contact with you and we'll make that work out for you. And, good on you for asking that. So other question is rune magic, sigil magic, Grant Morrison style. Is there an Asatru version of that, Trent?
Yeah, I saw this question coming in, and while I did not know who Grant Morrison was a minute ago, I sort of do now. The closest thing we have to that would be Sather, which is done by women. And then just kind of general rune work, which can be done by men or women. Galder might be the closest thing where we sort of chant or sing a rune and sort of focus on the meaning behind that rune, and we kind of put our vocal energy into that concept. Bind runes might be the closest thing to, well, I guess they literally are sigil magic if done properly. That's something I would do a lot of research into. Spekingr Swan is especially knowledgeable on bind runes and runes in general. I would shoot him an email if you're going to do anything like that. Third, and this isn't necessarily Grant Morrison style anything, but divination or augury, I guess, with the runes, by sort of calling out to the Nornir and giving bloat in a sense and asking them to answer a question or kind of give you a roadmap of what that which should be for a given period of time. For example, I've mentioned on here before, every year on the 9th night of Yule, I will do a 3 rune poll to see kind of how my next year is going to go. And it's sort of the Nornir sort of, I pull 3 runes, each one from each of the Nornir, and it kind of lays out how that year will go for me. And I've never had that rune poll not be clear by the end of the year what it meant. I think that's probably as close as you'll get to that kind of magical stuff, though, is bind runes, rune divination, and then Sather in general.
Bodi, what do you have?
Well, first, like Trent, I assume had to look up who this Grant Morrison person is. Some pretty fascinating stuff he's doing. I don't like the whole chaos magician thing or label that's put on him. I was just reading that he believes that corporate logos are powerful, quote unquote, super breeder sigils that invade and alter collective imaginative space. Okay. Reading what he believes, hyper sigils, as he calls them, to be, quote, extended reality bending narratives designed to edit reality. Well, I mean, that is one thing that you could say about the runes themselves, is that they are ideographic representations of mysteries and of cosmic lessons that our ancestors used to bend reality to their will, to do things that could not normally be done by other means. So, yeah, I agree with everything that Trent said as far as, reaching out to Spekingr Svan. He knows all about that. There's also in that kind of realm of thing, there, especially sigil magic, a lot of our folk are aware of the Galderstaffer, or the Galder book from Iceland. That's been largely, I don't want to say debunked, but it was a later working. It didn't come around until, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Australia, that was like the 1500s or 1600s when the Galderstaffer book was made. We don't know, we can't necessarily hang our hat on the validity of those. Everyone's familiar with 2 symbols that come from that book, being the Aegis Hjalmar, or the Helm of Awe, and the Vegvisir, aka the Viking compass. I can't. Again, we would have to get Spekingr Svan on here to really elaborate on that. But yes, our Asatru ancestors, most definitely worked with rune magic and sigil magic. Maybe not in the style of Mr. Morrison, but yes, they definitely did.
Yeah, so old does not equal authentic, or I guess more precisely, new does not equal inauthentic. Um, sure, sigil magic is absolutely a thing. I think in Morrison's kind of vein, but not really, art is inherently magical, or can be if the intention is imbued in it in its creation. There's a lot of ways to do that. There's a number of artists and craftsmen that, enchant items with, literally galdering as they create, with, casting runes into paints or molds or things they do. There's all kind of ways to magically imbue items and visual pieces that relate to sigil magic. I think the most overt is obviously bind runes, but I think that corporate logos can be, but to assume that they all are is naive. I think that the efficacy of magic comes from intent and imbuing something with intent. And if something accidentally looks like something else, it lacks the force of intent and the magical efficacy of something that is purposely crafted in a particular way to alter an outcome or to affect reality. So I think in order for that to be effective, you have to imbue it with intent. But yeah, there's plenty of that done in an Asatru context, with Sather practice, with bind runes, but in other forms of art, in spells we mentioned earlier with the Norns, the Nornir weaving and binding and weaving and binding. There's a lot of magical work involved in that. But yeah, that is absolutely. But to get like a really, a how-to manual or something isn't really a thing. So much of magical practice within an Asatru context is taught, master to apprentice, between colleagues. It's not something that is talked about very openly. I think sometimes there's a initiatory aspect to that. I think it also sounds goofy or silly to people that aren't well schooled in it or that don't have the context or the experience. So it's something that's typically discussed quietly in between people in private. But there's certainly an Asatru application to sigil magic, absolutely. And the final question of the night: what are the requirements of someone to become a Gothy with the AFA after becoming a member, if that's something they want to do? So the basic requirements are that you be a member, that you be a folk builder, and you spend your time as a folk builder apprentice, that you take your oath as a folk builder, and that you apply and are selected to enter the Gothar program, which requires you getting the trust of the existent Gothar and specifically of the Spekingr and myself, to where we trust that you're someone we want to potentially entrust with that ordination, with that responsibility. That requires you to go through training with a mentor and with the Gothar as a whole to develop the skills and the knowledge that you need and the trust that you need to be able to execute that office. So all of those things, it's important that you be a folk builder first and you do the hard work of building and maintaining our church. A lot of people want to, they get excited and they want to immediately become a Gothy so that they can do, and I don't think this is always frivolous. People are excited, and they're excited, and they want to serve the gods, and they conceive of that in a way that perhaps unknowingly is very theatrical. They want to do bloat. They want to perform ceremonies. They want to be this master of ceremonies person. They want to be, the flashy Gothy that does the stuff. And that's not wrong. But the position is so much more than that. It involves counseling, and it involves the responsibility of building and maintaining the Asatru folk assembly in a dignified and professional way that is so much more than just officiating ceremonies. And so we make people who want to be ordained go through the process of doing the not fun things, the mundane things that have to be done for this to function. And from there, having an understanding of our membership, of how the AFA works, along with their understanding of the lore and their ability to counsel and their building that relationship with the gods. So all of those things. Bodi, is there anything you would like to leave folks with tonight as far as reflections on perfection?
It is something to be strived for, but hardly ever attained. I don't know what perfection necessarily would look like in all aspects. I know that I every day try to perfect not only my craft of being a Gothi, but my professional craft. I try to be the best me that I can be every day. And I know that that's all that, can really be asked, is that I do try, and that I do, there's kind of the platitudes that you hear, like around, like coaches, like sports, sports analogies, you don't have to beat the other guy. You just need to beat you from yesterday. So I think that's on the road to perfection. If you can do better than you from yesterday, if the you of today can be better, and then the you of tomorrow can be better than you are today, well then, perfection is just a few more days down the road, is it not?
All right. And Trent, what final words would you like to leave folks with this evening?
As we kind of mentioned a couple times throughout this episode, the world is a little cynical now. The world is cynical, and it kind of wants to atomize us and make us all hyper individualistic. And we are all individuals. We have egos, whatever. But when you're going through a tough time, don't separate from your folk. Don't separate from your gods. Instead, draw closer to your folk and draw closer to your gods. If anyone in the AFA, of course, or even anyone here listening is going through something and they need to talk about it, email gothar@runestone.org. You can also email any of us personally, but gothar@runestone.org will be the quickest way to get a hold of somebody. But yeah, reach out if you're in trouble or you need to speak about something. Don't just wander off into the dark where we can't find you.
All right. Something I'd like you guys to remember. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Doing something is better than doing nothing. It is all right. So starting with your personal practice, if you're listening to this, a lot of people want to know, how do I start? What do I do? One day, if I read enough stuff, if I read these things, then I'll know enough that I can start praying to the gods. If I get an altar that's got idols on it and is set up the way I want, then I can do an offering. Man, maybe if I save up and I can go travel to an AFA event, then maybe I could think about joining, or I could, one of these days when life settles down and I get stuff figured out, then I think I might apply. One of these days. No, on all of those things, make today the day. To have the perfect altar would be awesome. Work on building that. In the meantime, make offerings to your gods. Give prayers to your gods. Reading and learning is amazing. Never stop. Always learn more. But right now, wherever you are, start being Asatru. Join the AFA. Not when you can travel somewhere, not when, things settle down or when whatever. Right now, fill out the application and join. Get on the team, be part of what we're doing. There's infinite ways that we can make this better and do things more perfectly. We're all eager to do that. Get on the team and do that with us. Don't worry about the perfect gathering. Worry about the gathering that you can make it to that's better than being stagnant and not gathering with your folk. Don't worry about your perfect vision of what you think the AFA or what you think Asatru should be. Participate in what Asatru is, and where you can, help us all to make it better. That's perennially valuable. That will always be good and always be welcomed. What's not is endless contemplation, endless navel gazing, and being paralyzed by the analysis of things. Start doing, start living our faith instead of, finding holes in what somebody else does, or, finding ways to critique. Find ways to participate. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I look forward to talking to you guys again next week on our 200th episode. Till then, hail the Aesir, hail the folk, hail the AFA. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me this evening. And remember, victory never sleeps.